Stop, friendly fire. Chapter 46 to 47. Chapter 46. Death's Companion. Shin Woo figured out where Sigald was. He was already in the center of Byron, protected by the thorn wall. Tyrion's force had just been bait, and the golems, which they'd form a temporary alliance with, were as well. So they were trying to kill us here? No, they made it so that you couldn't interfere. It seems like their interests don't align with yours. Or they know exactly who you are. Even after absorbing his precious subordinate's bones, Shin Woo didn't know what Sigald's true intentions were. However, he was sure of one thing: that this loyalty towards the Empire hadn't changed. Was Anti-Skull really just created to protect people from the undead curse? To kill the Emperor, who spread the undead curse? No, probably not. There's no way it's that simple. On second thought, there was something else that was strange. The undead Emperor, Jizahenu, had seemingly been researching immortality but was actually looking for a way to break through the barrier. And there must have been a few people who knew what he was planning. The Redadanes are a family of high-rank nobles that have been with Jizahenu since the very beginning. Were they really not aware of how to get past the barrier? Sarah might not have, but it wouldn't make sense for Sigald von Redadane, the past head of the Redadane family, to have no knowledge about it. No. What even was Anti-Skull? Was it truly an organization designed to research methods to resist the undead curse? Was that all? If not, then perhaps. Damn, let's think about this later. Let's get a move on for now. Agreed. It seems like our alliance with Anti-Skull is already meaningless. As always, Urema Steelworker despised following Shin Woo's orders and moving according to his will. However, he hated Sigald von Redadane more, who'd put him in this situation in the first place. Above all, he wanted to know what Sigald was planning. His strength may not be enough, but he was sure the heaven-defying general would be able to find out. I'm going at full speed, so try to keep up. Leave behind anyone who can't keep up. It might take a bit longer, but we're all going. Your choice. Let's go. Jin really ran at full speed. They couldn't reveal everything, so Shin Woo didn't reveal his darkness and Jin didn't reveal her light. However, just the fact that she used all of her skills and exhibited such overwhelming speed was enough to astound the others with her speed. That horse. I knew he wasn't normal, but to think even his horse was unusual. The Metal Army realized just how far ahead Shin Woo had gotten, gritted their teeth, and followed him. Fortunately, no other traps activated as they rushed after him. Urema and the rest of the golems were relieved, thinking that all the traps had been destroyed already. They couldn't even imagine that Shin Woo was actively disarming them as they went along. Anyway, what was that explosion all about anyway? It must have been Sigald von Redadane. If not, then it might have been the spirit general, Dana von Edleber. It looked like magic to me. It'd be nice if it was Kracia or Prince, but it probably wasn't. Which means, the first thing that came to mind was the Archmage, Theotane von Seldin. There was a chance he was here. The palace might have sent some insurance, aside from the Golden Shadow General. There really are 3 of the 4 heavenly commanders, of the 12 generals, here. If that were indeed true, then not immediately striking down Urema Steelworker while also bringing him to his side was a wise decision. If the Annihilation Flame Sword God and the Archmage were truly there, then it wouldn't matter how strong Shin Woo was, he wouldn't be able to take them on whilst protecting his allies. That only matters if they're still alive. As a test, Shin Woo sent all of them a private chat request. All of them denied his request, but the fact that they even denied his request meant that they were still alive. But it also meant that they didn't have the time to answer him. That's probably what it meant. It was just a hypothesis, but there should be 3 level 8 members of the 12 generals in there. Lord Paul 0, we were waiting for you. Shin Woo soon arrived in front of the thorn wall. He'd called the Kai Pauls beforehand. Aside from the 3 who'd been injured and retreated, all of the Kai Pauls had gathered here. I see it. The thorn wall. Huh? Are those your subordinates? They're not weaker than me. Where exactly did they come from? Urema Steelworker and his elites had arrived. They were shocked once they saw the Kai Pauls standing by. Although they were standing right in front of them, they couldn't properly sense their presence, as if they were looking at the Golden Shadow. I would have been suspicious if you hadn't called your subordinates in such a dire situation. So you did have your forces here. They're all strong too. How did you nurture them in the Empire? No, wait, did they come from the surface? Who? The golems stirred up a commotion while the Kai Pauls desperately suppressed their urge to kill them. He knew this would happen. After all, they had been used as their test subjects in the past. Fortunately, unlike Tarion, they were decent enough actors to not allow their emotions to show. It was all due to Shin Woo's influence. This is why you had to have a good master. Paul 0. Do you have a way to get through the wall? If you don't, then we have no choice but for the two of us to attack at once. We don't have time to waste here. Shin Woo replied and extended his hand, feeling as though Arama was a pain in the ass. Even now, he was trying to get a feel for his abilities. The area of the wall his fingertips were pointed at collapsed without any resistance. He had condensed the evil eye ore into a single, tiny piece, which was floating over to him. But such a trivial thing had given Arama Steelworker quite the shock. Impossible. The thorn wall. Let's go. He'd completely broken the link in the affected area, so the collapsed area didn't repair itself. With just one gesture, Shin Woo had broken the thorn wall, the Empire's pride and joy. Shin Woo just took command of the Kai Pauls and went inside. Arama Steelworker couldn't believe his eyes and pounded on the thorn wall with his full strength. Aside from the area Shin Woo had just demolished, the rest of the wall retained its incredible durability. Why, I see it. No, it's tremendous. The thorn wall must also prevent people from sensing the mana within its walls. While he could sense the cannon's immense mana before, once he broke through the thorn wall and went inside, he realized that that was just the tip of the iceberg. That wasn't all. He also felt traces of other mana spread far and wide. It is the Archmage, Theotain von Seldin. This isn't even funny. There were monsters everywhere. There were traps set up around the city that summoned monsters or undead, but this wasn't even comparable to that. The Archmage had probably used his spatial magic to summon monsters from wherever he could. Break through. Understood. For now at least, the golems and the Kai Pauls were like-minded and charged. Shin Woo and Arama Steelworker used their respective command skills to aid their troops and fought at the vanguard. Hundreds, no thousands of monsters sensed their hostility and rushed towards them, but they couldn't stop Shin Woo or Arama Steelworker. Yu, we're running all the way to the cannon. Show them the pride of a steelworker. The two level 8s, one of them was riding atop another level 8, charged side by side. It looked like an eraser as they cleared a path through the battlefield. Of course, the ones they didn't kill were soon erased by the following Kai Pauls and golems. It was a real spectacle. Hundreds, no thousands of monsters turning to dust in an instant. The heaven-defying general. In the midst of all that, the heroes finally noticed them. Kracia, who knew that Shin Woo was the heaven-defying general, looked slightly relieved, while Prince was shocked that the heaven-defying general had shown up with the metal general. She was more concerned about Shin Woo not showing up than being fearful of them. What about Junior? What about our Junior? Arama, we're helping the heroes. They're on our side. Those half-wits, huh? I thought as much, but are you a hero who died and turned into an undead? And one who still retained the spirit of a hero? Think what you want, but listen to my orders. Kook, it was great that he'd found them, but at the same time, there were others that caught his eye. First up was Theotain von Seldin, who was floating around the cannon and emitting an overwhelming pressure. As expected, he'd found his way here too. It seems we have more guests. If you wanted to kill the Empire's monsters so badly, then you should have requested an audience with His Majesty first. Once he'd discovered Shin Woo's group, he seemed to get a bit tense, though superficially, as he didn't lose his cool. He was probably confident in his spatial element. And he'd also used that very magic to cause chaos. Kugarurua. But there was a bigger issue than the Archmage himself. A beautiful woman was tied to the center of the cannon's gun barrel with a chain made of evil eye. She had black hair and pale, white skin. He could sense a large quantity of mana from within her, and there were hundreds of corrupted spirits roaming around her. Most of them were level 6 or even level 7 spirits, which were further increasing her power. LV8 Spirit General Dana von Etleber, undead transformation delayed. Once he was finished looking her over, he was shocked at the information he saw. What, she wasn't undead? Her undead transformation was being delayed? What the hell did that even mean? He didn't know what it meant, so he examined her himself and came to a shocking conclusion. The undead curse still hasn't properly saturated her body. She was definitely being affected by the undead curse. She was indeed being affected by it, but the curse was being sucked out of her body as if Shin Woo or Jin were absorbing it. Thus, her undead transformation hadn't progressed. She was experiencing so much pain, but he couldn't really say that she was alive. If that's the case, then where was the mana that escaped her body heading? The answer was simple. It was going into the cannon. Hey, Arima, even if you were to fire this death energy charged cannon at the palace, it doesn't seem like it'll do any damage. On the contrary, won't it make him stronger instead? It does seem that way. Sagald, that bastard, what the hell is he thinking? That's how it was built. The mana of the city's inhabitants and spirits would be gathered by the spirit general's ability so that the cannon could be fired. The undead curse had filled the undead empire, so the curse that affected her body was being drained by the cannon itself. It was truly horrifying, but it was precisely because of this that she hadn't turned into an undead yet and had survived. No one could have expected this. They hadn't scrapped this failed project before moving on to the next, which had resulted in all their failed products remaining here. That's what this all meant. She doesn't seem sane though. She had been the cannon's straw that supplied energy to it by gathering the world's and spirits' magic for dozens of years. It would be a miracle if she had actually retained her sanity. Sarah von Rededane must have thought that she wouldn't be in this situation as a princess. And right now, Sarah von Rededane was. Die. Just die already, little sister. Now's not the time for this. Don't you see that lich looking down at us? Die. Please, die. Having a bloody sibling feud with the Annihilation Flame Sword God, Sagald von Rededane. I knew she'd be like this. Shin Woo thought as he watched her crazily swinging her flail at the Annihilation Flame Sword God. He knew she'd be like this if she met Sagald, so it didn't feel out of place at all. This is why he didn't want to bring her along. Plus, he'd wanted to take care of Sagald before he got into the city, but it was too late, he was already here. He hadn't planned for this. TCH. Damn skeleton. There are too many monsters, so there's nothing much we can do. Guak. Giek. Arima Steelworker gritted his teeth with a similar expression from beside him. In the midst of that, Arima punched with his steel fist, killing dozens of monsters in a single blow. Truly befitting of one of the Empire's 4 heavenly commanders. Shin Woo just couldn't compare in terms of pure physical strength. He was strong enough to take on Sagald at least. Shin Woo wanted to be the one to take on Sagald, but he was concerned about the lich. It was obvious that Arima wasn't a good match for the Archmage. That's why he'd moved so stealthily before. I'll take care of the lich. You handle Sagald. It's unfortunate that that crazy woman's there, but you'll have to put your life on the line. Don't forget to uphold your end of the bargain. We'll engrave that contract upon our very souls. Sure, if you can even find your own soul, that is. A person's words become karma, especially if the speaker is at a high level. Breaking one's promise would result in extremely negative karma. Unfortunately, Shin Woo possessed karma that specialized in lying, cheating, or coming up with excuses. What's worse, Shin Woo also had the Shining Flame, Dark Shadow, and Dark Flame, so the contract was meaningless before him. Arima was wasting his time by trusting in the contract. A contract's sacred. I have no intention of carrying these things around forever, so don't worry and just go fight. Huh, you sound trustworthy. Worry about yourself, since it's a lot more troublesome fighting against the Archmage than Sagald. I'll promise you this, my battle will end a lot quicker than yours. Shin Woo assured, looked up at the Archmage, and had Jin unfurl her wings. Everyone on the battle flinched, as the ridiculously fast horse had sprouted wings. But what came next was even more shocking. She fluttered her wings and arrived in front of the Archmage instantaneously. Shin Woo was already aiming the tip of his lance, which was covered in a swaying black energy, at the middle of the Archmage's forehead. Huh, huh. Shin Woo let out a short battle cry and thrust forward. It was so quick that no one could tell where it was going. On the contrary, it felt like it'd be easier to dodge a random lightning bolt that came from a clear blue sky. As a lich, whose stats were primarily focused on magic, he couldn't dodge it. And he thought there was no real reason to dodge it either. Fiatane's body, as well as the area around him, was tinged in his magic, and the space was distorted. Once he entered the Archmage's domain, it wouldn't matter how strong Li Shin Woo's attack was. His attack would either go awry or break under the pressure. What? My mana? Why is my mana? At least, that's what Fiatane von Selden thought, but overconfidence would always come back to bite you. Li Shin Woo erased the Archmage's spatial mana, as if he were putting out a candle flame, and thrust his lance into his forehead. He screamed in pain as if he were an ordinary person meeting a ninja in the middle of the night. If you wanted to dodge my attack, then you should have tried something new. Hup, gua. After stabbing the lich, he threw his lance into the air. In an instant, the lich's agonizing cries became distant. If he could, he would have taken this more slowly, but Li Shin Woo didn't have that option right now. This was the best he could do. He's really something. Dark Shadow was almost not enough. I almost needed to pull out the Shining and Dark Flames too. The Archmage really lives up to his name. Wait, why is that guy still level 8? Li Shin Woo had discreetly applied Dark Shadow to his previous attack, allowing him to nullify the Archmage's mana and reach him. Although he could use innate elements, repeatedly fighting in CQC against the Lich, who could almost infinitely use his spatial magic, was impossible. His instinct as a joker allowed him to put up a strong front, but it was a close call. He'd almost used 70% of his mana in that last attack. It was really a close call. He thought he'd die. Sup. The title of 4 heavenly commanders isn't for nothing. He'd only realized this after reaching level 8 and fighting against them, but the Archmage's magic was considerable. It was proof that he was highly ranked amongst level 8s. He could barely match it if he were to call his 17 weapons and suck them dry, but if he were to do that, then he would soon be crushed by the spatial magic. Fiatane von Selden possessed enough magic to overcome Li Shin Woo's elemental advantage. If I want to fight against a guy like that, then my best option's doing as much damage as I can while his spatial magic's disabled and then running away. Let's move on. Doing as much damage as he could and then retreating. He wasn't going to repeat that last attack again, since there was no way someone of his level would get hit by the same attack twice. He became even more sure of it when he saw Arama Steelworker, who showed what a true warrior was. Li Shin Woo was only good at CQC because of Jin. He actually didn't specialize in it. What he did specialize in was Kiahyok, controlling bone. Before the Lich got a hold of himself and pulled the lance out, Li Shin Woo caused it to explode through Rule of Bone. The explosion was focused entirely on the Lich. In order to deal with this, the Lich released his own magic, but he was suddenly struck by another lance. The Archmage had been so focused on his magic in order to deal with the resulting energy of the explosion that he couldn't dodge the second lance. That won't work twice. Kahawk. The Archmage's overwhelming spatial magic had crumpled the lance, but it didn't matter. The lance had already pierced his body, and crumpling up a weapon wouldn't decrease the force of its explosion. He exploded that one too. The Lich emitted even more magic to deal with the resulting energy, but Li Shin Woo then lodged another weapon, a sword gleaming with white light, and caused a third explosion. Critical hit. The Lich wasn't able to withstand Li Shin Woo's attacks and felt his consciousness go white as his body and magic began to fade. This severing property was definitely the light element, or perhaps something even greater. Fortunately, it wasn't powerful enough to sever him from his core, but if he were to die here, then he would lose a significant amount of magic. However, there was something even more important than that. You tricked me. Who controls space itself? How? How did you do it? You already know, don't you? Yeah, I tricked you. Or rather, I tricked your mana. Victory in a battle between magicians relied on 3 factors. 1. The level of the one using magic. 2. The level of one's magic. In terms of this battle, it'd be the level of his elements. And finally, the quantity of the mana one possessed. He'd cleared both the first and second conditions, but he didn't feel like he could overcome the Archmage in the third, so he used Rule of Bone and Wildcard in conjunction to overcome that hurdle. He had a brief period of time to recover between hitting him with a weapon and then exploding it. If he could repeatedly give himself that time, then it would be Li Shin Woo's win. Thus, Li Shin Woo could fool his wide-reaching mana senses with his Wildcard skill and struck with his weapons. This was only possible because of his acting skill, which had leveled up and enabled him to fool a part of the world, mana itself. Trick, you tricked my mana? If you don't want them to see, then shut their eyes. If you don't want them to smell, then block their nose. If you don't want them to hear your secret, then you cover their ears. Watch. If I know what I want to trick, then it's easy. Even if you did trick me, how were you able to erase the spatial magic protecting me? Kahak. The Archmage couldn't figure out what he'd done and gritted his teeth. At that moment, Shin Woo summoned a fourth weapon, sliced apart a bracelet the Archmage was wearing, and then lodged it into the Archmage's chest and exploded it. The bracelet was probably an artifact that supplemented his health or magic. The Archmage's body had already reached its limit and should have disappeared already. His bracelet and his body glimmered and he had been alive despite the critical damage. That ended it. Ultimately, the Archmage died, without getting an answer to his question. The Archmage hadn't been able to figure out the specifics of Shin Woo's innate element. TCH. However, Shin Woo clicked his tongue, as though he'd found the Archmage's death and disappearance annoying. The reason was clear, since all he had left behind was the bracelet he'd sliced in half. That meant only one thing. The Lich hadn't truly died. It didn't matter if his physical body was destroyed since his soul remained safe and sound within a separate container. His physical body would eventually be restored. He'd be back. I tried erasing his existence with Shining Flame, stealing his soul through Dark Flame, and when that didn't work, I tried using Dark Shadow to inverse the transmission of his consciousness back to his container and bring the container here instead, but each and every one of the weapons Shin Woo had used had held an innate element, but none of his 3 innate elements had worked. Then, did that mean that he had no choice but to find that damn Lich's soul to kill him? The Emperor was probably a Lich too, so he would need to find a way to destroy souls remotely. Huh? In the midst of all this, the floating bracelet gathered an enormous amount of mana and restored itself. No, that wasn't all. It actually became stronger than before. Shin Woo then grabbed the artifact. The artifact has absorbed a portion of the Lich's core mana and is evolving. You have acquired the LV8 Proof of Death, +4. Core mana. The artifact was comprised of bones, but it was difficult to figure out how it was made. It was probably made from the bones of an ancient high-level monster, as well as the Archmage's own bones. But there was something more important than all that. Shin Woo had destroyed the artifact, yet it had actually evolved once the Lich had disappeared. Why? The answer was included in the message. It had absorbed some of the Lich's core mana. In other words, Shin Woo had succeeded in taking a portion of Theotaine von Seldon's soul. So it wasn't entirely ineffective, huh? Shin Woo smiled slightly. He hadn't been going in the wrong direction. Now all he needed to do was push on and refine himself. It was good that he fought the Archmage here. With that feeling of relief, he turned around, but, oh, Gu, Kiahyok, it looks like we'll finally be together, little sister. Ah. He saw Sigald's sword pierce through Sarah von Retidane's heart. Arama Steelworker had really done his best. He was not only mad at Sigald but was also stressed out from all the events that had occurred here, so he went at full power and tried taking it all out on Sigald. It's not your turn yet, Arama. Huh? Are you avoiding me? Sarah, are you going to oppose me? However, Sigald just ignored Arama's attack and taunt, and concentrated entirely on his little sister, Sarah von Retidane. One simply couldn't avoid the metal general without any repercussions. As evidence of this, Sigald's armor was chipped in several places. Even so, he didn't bat an eye at Arama. Kuha, haha, you've grown a lot. Moreover, Sarah von Retidane wouldn't accept Arama's help. She just glared at Sigald with eyes wide open and swung her flail. Arama would have to be careful so that he didn't get in the way of that flail. The power of severing, or light mana, was extremely dangerous to Arama Steelworker as well, even though he was already separated from his physical body and his soul was safely encased in a golem's shell. Kua, you're both crazy. My lord, we'll get that crazy woman away from him. Then you can focus on the Annihilation Flame Sword God. You can't, since this damn woman is level 8. Grr, why did he have to be involved in this? Why did he have to save that foolish woman, who was being manipulated by the curse? Arama attacked once more, his fists containing all of that rage and frustration. Although he wasn't looking, Sagald was still able to dodge Arama's attack and faced off against Sarah once more. I made you wait too long, Sarah. Die. Just die. I'm sorry I made you worry. But the pieces are all set now. That's why I came to see you. Yu, the power of light. What a sight. How could they be so engaged in their conversation without caring about anything around them? Sarah being crazy was a given, but Sagald was too. Last they spoke, he seemed quite sane, so how did it turn out like this? Or was there something that induced such behavior? No, that wasn't important. If Sagald wasn't going to take him on, then he had no choice but to unleash an attack. One so powerful that Sagald would have no choice but to shift his focus. Arama released his gigantification and returned to his normal, human form. He then focused all of his mana into one place. The ambient mana that wasn't yet under Sagald or Redadane's control was being sucked in by Arama. This is metal, the element he could only learn once he became a golem. By concentrating his mana into a single spot and converting it into the metal element, he could temporarily form a metallic substance that surpassed the limits of metal. Metal God. It was only temporary, but for an instant, Arama Steelworker had formed metal that surpassed all metal in this world and had truly become a metal god. He possessed exceptional durability and destructive power that befitted his namesake, the Metal God General. While Sarah and Sagald were fighting, Arama charged at full speed. As expected, Sagald noticed this. He couldn't dodge it, he could only take it or block it. Sarah was also attacking him, meaning he couldn't dodge either of the attacks. Huh? At that moment, Arama felt something strange. It felt as though Sagald had disappeared. In the past, he'd felt something similar from the Archmage. Was it the spatial element? No, Sagald wielded the light element, so that didn't make any sense. But it doesn't matter. The Archmage was a pain in the ass, but it was because of that he had researched ways of dealing with him. His Metal God ability was one of them. It covered his outer body in metal and was also an aggregation of high-level mana. Just by existing, the Metal God ability repressed the usage of ambient mana. A level 8 Za authority, or rather, their ability to dominate mana, was in essence, a guaranteed reinforcement in a small space. At this range, it wouldn't matter what he used. Whether it was spatial magic or something else, it wouldn't be perfect. Arama kicked off the ground one last time. His extended right fist hit Sagald's helmet. Ha! Arama yelled in bewilderment. The moment his fist struck, his helmet turned into transparent flames. Transparent flame? What the hell was that? These blazing flames were so powerful that they threatened to melt Arama's fist. But his own Metal God ability was no pushover. If Sagald was being protected by these unknown flames, then all he needed to do was get through them. You've improved, Arama. You're the one who hid such a terrifying ability. Ultimately, he managed to erase Sagald's flame, though a portion of his hand was melted away in exchange. To be exact, he had destroyed half of Sagald's head, which had been protected by the transparent flame-turned helmet. Sagald had concentrated entirely on his element, like Arama had, and had changed his helmet temporarily. Or at least, that was Arama's assumption. TCH. In terms of elements, he's way above me. If that Redadane wench hadn't attacked with me, then I would have been pushed back. More importantly, did the heaven-defying general see this? No, is he actually putting up a fight against the Lich? In any case, Sagald was critically injured. A part of his body had melted away, so he couldn't fight anymore, but if the heaven-defying general were to help out, then they should be able to kill Sagald. However, oh, Gu, Kiahiok, it looks like we'll finally be together, little sister. Ah, Arama, who was shaken by Sagald's newfound power, suddenly realized what just happened. Sagald had taken both of their attacks, but in return, had stabbed Sarah in the heart. Damn it, Gua, open your eyes, Sarah. Don't be controlled by your hatred. Open your eyes and look at me. I'll show you the right path. So you've finally killed your little sister. Uck, a transparent light erupted from Sagald's blade and was flowing through Redadane's body. Sarah, who'd lost her flail, began to shake. The light that burst from her body accepted those bizarre flames and began to change her body. To put it bluntly, it was an incredibly unpleasant scene. Ha, kook. At that moment, Shin Woo, who'd descended from the sky, thrust his sword at Sagald. Sagald hadn't moved an inch when Arama had attacked him with his metal body, but surprisingly, he avoided Shin Woo's attack and retreated. Transparent flames. Is that what it means by annihilation flame? It wasn't the power of burning others, but burning oneself. It's an innate element that was created by fusing fire and light together, right? Heaven-defying General, Paul Zero. To think you'd be able to defeat the Archmage this quickly. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to kill him for good. That guy sure is good at running away. Shin Woo landed futilely. The white light at the tip of his shining bone sword had missed its target and merely burned the air around him. No, perhaps it had burned away some of Sigald's flames that he didn't have time to withdraw. If he could, he would have helped Sarah immediately, but his instincts were telling him not to look away from Sigald. He pointed his shining bone sword at Sigald and looked at him. Your control over your magic is exceptional. You feel like a real magic swordsman? Shin Woo was superior in magic, but Sigald seemed physically stronger than him. But the worst part was Sigald's innate element. According to his title, it was called Annihilation Flame. Contrary to his shining flame, which came outwards and extinguished all cause and effect, the annihilation flame was collected inside of one's body and erased one's own cause and effect. One could erase their presence, their mana, their physical body, traces of any injuries, or even a portion of the curse that shackled them. How far it reached depended on the user. Thus, Urema's steelworker's attack, which should have been fatal, was not, and his attack against Sarah had become unavoidable when it normally should have been. In a sense, it was similar to Shin Woo's wildcard skill, which fooled his enemies and the world itself. It would probably have a great affinity with his wild card ability. Maybe just as much as his dark shadow ability did. What is that flame? You're a lot different than what I'd heard. You're a lot different from what I've heard about you too, so I'm quite surprised myself. Shin Woo greeted him and took a step back. Sarah was staggering and Shin Woo grabbed Sigald's sword, which was still embedded in her heart. The annihilation flame within her body blazed, as if putting up fierce resistance, but once he focused his white flames into it, her body became cleared of the transparent flames. Kook, guak, just bear with it, you old bag. He pulled out the sword and vaporized it upon realizing that he couldn't steal it. Now wasn't the time to be greedy over a weapon. Who, Urema, can you keep fighting? How can you say that when you look at me? Now it's your turn. I have to treat this woman. Treat? A way other than completely killing her before she becomes an undead? Urema said sarcastically, someone calmly assessing the situation and then speaking logically pissed Shin Woo off the most. Shin Woo clicked his tongue and extended his hand towards Urema. It was the most fundamental power of the light element, the ability to heal. This should be enough, right? He infused a ton of magic into extinguishing the annihilation flame and healing Urema. Of course, his body wasn't exactly the same as before, and his spent magic wouldn't return, but this should be enough for him to continue fighting. This is, who the hell are you? Doesn't matter, fight him a little while longer. I'd rather you not touch her right now. Sigald said and instantaneously appeared in front of Shin Woo with a new sword in hand. He swung his sword downwards, but Jin came rushing over at light speed and kicked him away. Ha, kahak. The sight of her feet sprouting steel thorns covered in white light and hitting Sigald was quite striking. That wasn't all. Her entire body, including her wings, was wrapped in light as if she were a mythical beast. A horse. How did a horse? My horse will help you. Can you do it? There's no way a horse exists that can kick Sigald at light speed. Damn it. Fine, I'll do it. That's fine, right? Urema, who saw Sigald fly away from Jin's kick and barely stand up, was speechless at such an unexplainable phenomenon but was soon ready to fight once more. Now that it's come to this, I wouldn't be surprised if a skeleton turned into a human. Sigald, how did it feel, getting kicked by a horse? A skill befitting an irregular. However, Sigald's body blazed within the air and then disappeared. His mana and his presence had disappeared, but everyone was sure that he was still here. No matter how fast light is, it can't catch something that doesn't exist. HMPH. Jin snorted, but Urema broke into a cold sweat. She wasn't experienced in battle. She wouldn't last long against Urema. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. Hurry. She scraped at the air with her horse hooves. Urema tightened his fist as they were simultaneously attacked by the transparent sword god. Shin Woo confirmed that they were fighting and quickly turned around to begin Sarah's treatment. Hua, you. Oh, Granny's got a nice voice. He was really worried about Prince and Kracia too, but with Jin and Arama fighting against the Annihilation Flame Sword God, he should have enough time. Moreover, Kracia had harmonized with her orb, temporarily boosting her abilities above their limit, so she wouldn't die, regardless of how the situation progressed. I have to focus on saving this old lady now. Shin Woo observed the disparate energy deep within her and his expression soured. He'd learned 3 innate elements, so he'd thought it would be easy to save her, but things were a lot different from what he'd expected. Sagald, you bastard. Sagald hadn't killed his sister just because he was a crazy bastard. He inflicted a grievous injury onto Sarah and had simultaneously infused Annihilation Flame into her. The Annihilation Flame and the Undead Curse, which would transform one into the undead depending on how close they were to death, had overlapped and had become something else entirely. And that was Anti-Skull. That's right, he thought he'd felt this energy before, but it was similar to Sagald von Rededane's mana. In other words, this was a ceremony that turned someone into a member of Anti-Skull. Sagald had attempted to kill his sister and induct her into Anti-Skull. He said something about losing her way, or that he'd show her the right path, but how could Anti-Skull be the right path? He was willing to go so far as to kill his own little sister to ensure that she was on his side. As I thought, all these undead bastards are crazy. But wait a sec. But as the different energies interfered with each other, Shin Woo came to another realization. The Annihilation Flame element had eliminated a portion of the undead curse's mana and had changed its inherent properties, creating something entirely new. It was similar to his Paul's mana. He felt as though he was struck by lightning when he came to a realization. Was the reason they came into contact with the Pauls to perfect the Anti-Skull experiment? So I'm the reason Anti-Skull was perfected? His Pauls had told him that they'd met with Sagald, yet they had left unscathed. If that's the case, then why did they come into contact with Pauls that weren't under the direct command of the heaven-defying general? It made sense if they were used as data to perfect the Anti-Skull test. If that's the case, then was the reason Sagald chose now to act because he'd gotten inspiration from the way Shin Woo created the Pauls and managed to complete the Anti-Skull test. So he'd led his own little sister to Byron, and had even led the other forces here to cause chaos. Hua, if you were smart enough to make that call, then you should have just told your little sister how to live. You may have copied my methods, but at the end of the day, you're still undead. Once he understood Sarah's condition, he attempted to reverse her condition with each of his innate elements one by one. He tried Dark Shadow first. It would have been easy if he could sever cause and effect, reversing her death, but he'd somewhat expected this himself, but he wasn't at the level where he could do that yet. It was similar to bringing a dead person back to life. If he could do this, then he would have given Jin a human body already. He tried his Dark Flame next. He wanted to steal the curse that ate away at her, but because of what Sagald had done, her mana, the undead curse, and Sagald's Annihilation Flame element were mixing together and becoming something else entirely. Unless he stole all of her mana, there was nothing he could do. If he were to steal all of her mana, she would vanish without a trace. The Shining Flame was also out of the question using the same logic. What about light? This won't work either. Sagald's Annihilation Flame element devoured Sarah's light and actually became stronger. He prepared this specifically for Sarah, though my darkness should work. So long as the curse was, at its core, based on the darkness element, it had no choice but to be controlled by it. Shin Woo had already achieved peak darkness mastery, and if he linked himself with Sarah's mana, which filled her body to the brim and was bursting, then he could cause her mana to change in a completely different direction. But it would still change her into an undead. He would stop her from becoming a part of Anti-Skull, but would in turn turn her into an undead like the Pauls. Then, what other options do I have? Sacrifice? In the past, when he'd saved Jin, he'd gained a skill called Sacrifice due to his karma. It was a skill that allowed him to kill himself to save someone on the brink of death. He'd accumulated 164 lives as if they were mileage, so he decided to test out the skill. But then, the target is changing due to a status ailment. Thus, you cannot target them with this skill. How can you call this a status ailment? You said I could save someone on the brink of death. She's clearly dying. So does it only work when they're dying from something physical? A case like that'd be hard to find. What a shitty skill. As expected of Anti-Skull's leader, Li Shin Woo had mastered several abilities, yet even he was hard-pressed to deal with this. Then again, it was because Sigald was this skilled that he was able to free the undead from the curse and turn them into Anti-Skull in the first place. He was so skilled that it pissed Li Shin Woo off. Alright, let's give up on saving her. Granny, you lived a long life. He boldly decided to give up on her. Plus, he didn't really cherish her enough to risk his life to save her. He just thought that it'd be better to save her. But because it wouldn't work, he had to give up on it. But if he just left her like this, she would definitely become a powerful ally to Sigald in the future. For level 8, she didn't seem like much, but she might get stronger as an undead. So rather than let that happen, it would be better to kill her here and now. And if it were possible, then, sup, what should I do with you? Even now, Sarah was doing her best to resist the transformation, but her screams were getting louder and louder. The Annihilation Flame element, which was attempting to remake her, the undead curse, which had undergone a special evolution that made it more offensive, and her own mana, which wasn't capable of mounting a proper resistance and was being influenced by the two. Why did he have to pierce her heart, not only infusing his Annihilation Flame element into her, but also contaminating all of her veins and arteries? This bastard, he even anticipated my intervention. Moreover, Sarah was the hero that had operated in the Underground Empire the longest, so she had accumulated the most of the undead curse within her body. All those factors worked together to cause the worst possible outcome. In any case, she wouldn't last long. Her body wouldn't survive, so he had to make a decision fast. In the end, he only really had one option. I guess I have no choice. I have to do it. Gook, Gurururu. Li Shin Woo extended his hand with a truly regretful expression and placed it upon her chest wound. His hand emitted a deep darkness and was absorbed into her wound. At the same time, he took hold of her seizing body. Eventually, the darkness spread, taking hold over their surroundings as well. Li Shin Woo wasn't aware of this, but time slowed within this space. Alright, let's talk first. It won't be too late to make a decision afterwards. Because of the shock to her mind and body, it was impossible to hold a proper conversation with her. However, if he were to connect them together with his darkness element, then he would be able to talk to her mentally, like how he talked to Jin or his subordinates. Undead, get away from me this instant. He succeeded in his attempt. She didn't scream, rather, he could feel her intent. Although it wasn't very kind to him. You're no longer alive, either. You'll become an undead soon. You'll be together with your older brother. Aren't you happy? I don't want to. I don't want to become an undead. Why was it that he decided to tease someone endlessly whenever he could? Because of his unnecessary jab, Sarah's seizures intensified noticeably. I'd rather die than become an undead. Kill me. I said kill me. Then who'll save the empire? You were always preaching about God or whatnot. Are you going to abandon your calling as a hero? Li Shin Woo will. He'll save the empire. Li Shin Woo hesitated. He hadn't even imagined that she'd bring him up. Is it because she didn't need to hesitate and could just speak her mind? Like always, she continued with a lengthy speech. I regret not being able to take down the Emperor and my older brother with my own hands, but he should be able to stop them. He's still only level 8. He's different from me and the other heroes. Unlike me, who indiscriminately hates the undead due to the undead curse, he considers even the undead as chess pieces. He'll do everything in his power to completely destroy the Underground Empire. No way. She'd unexpectedly assessed him perfectly. Li Shin Woo had no intention of dating her or something as frivolous as that, but he didn't think she had such a favorable opinion of him. An undead's existence is wrong. And the Underground Empire is even worse, as they're attempting to use their strength to take over the surface as well. It was my fate to stop them from leaving the underground, but it's fine now since Li Shin Woo is there. So just kill me, undead. It seems like you know a part of the truth. If you know why they're trying to invade the surface, then why didn't you join them? I hate the surface too, but, as I thought. Li Shin Woo was actually having a lot of fun right now. Sarah, who had hidden all of her feelings before, was pouring her heart and soul out to Li Shin Woo. He just regretted that he didn't have a bowl of popcorn with him. I hate them. The Emperor who banished us underground and the God who abandoned us. But if, in the process of escaping to the surface, it means that we have to hurt innocent people on the surface and he has to put his little sister's close friend and his fiancée into such a miserable state, then I'd rather bury the empire and its empty greed, so that humanity can live on. Fiancé? Ah, the princess was Segald's fiancé, huh? I understand. Shin Woo decided to reflect on his statement of Sarah being an insane woman. She was definitely insane, but she was still a hero who had her own thoughts and feelings. Was there some hope here? If that's the case, then you don't hate the undead. You hate the undead curse, and the undead emperor's forces, who seek to invade the surface. Why do you hate even me, who is against them and seeks to destroy the undead curse? Think calmly. Can't we become friends? The undead curse. Ah, now that I've become neither dead nor alive, I can say this clearly. That I can never join hands with the undead. Seriously, why not? Sarah seized once more. Her own mana, light, the undead curse, and the annihilation flame element mixed together, causing a reaction between them and blazed violently. If Shin Woo's darkness element hadn't blended into it and hadn't kept her stable, then she would have already turned into a member of Anti-Skull. There are no undead free of the undead curse. Even my older brother, who searched for a way to resist it for dozens of years, stabbed my chest. My older brother, who could wield the light better than anyone else, was unable to avoid the effects of the curse, so no one can escape its effects. We have to bury everything, so that nothing comes out. That's the only way the world can continue on. Is that really what you think? Yes. So now, please, if you're truly cooperating with Shin Woo, then, if you're even acting as though you are, then just kill me. I said, kill me. Unfortunately, Shin Woo unleashed even more darkness, forcing a connection between them, and for the first time, the annihilation flame element began to wane. The undead curse, which had mutated and was eating away at her, instantaneously lost its strength, and Sarah's own light mana and Shin Woo's darkness mixed together and became murky. This was the start of their contract. I can't just let you go like this, senior. What, Shin Woo? It hadn't lasted very long, but their face-to-face talk had at least come to an end. Shin Woo made his decision. He would make this troublesome granny into his ally. Into an undead. This is a contract. Contract mana? Exactly. It's the most peaceful of the darkness element's powers. These memories. Kuuk. What Shin Woo had done was simple. He had increased the darkness between himself and Sarah, and had used the most fundamental feature of the darkness element, the contract. They would be connected together, so in a lot of ways, it was a really convenient ability to use. But there was a condition automatically added to a contract. That one cannot lie during the contract process. And he used that fact to quickly and concisely relay some truthful information to her regarding himself. Telling her who he was, why he looked like this, what he had been doing thus far, as well as what he wanted to do from now on. And what she wanted to do. How did you? Why? Oh, there's no point in giving you the long story. You don't have that kind of time anyway. You know that I'm not lying to you. Since a contract is sacred, Shin Woo was capable of violating the contract through his dark shadow and wildcard skills, but it was unnecessary to tell her that. In any case, what he was relaying to her were only truthful memories of his past. Kook, how did this happen? You can do stuff like this when you reach peak mastery of an element. You pretty much understand now, right? I can't believe it, but still, why would God want me to ask your older sister? Moreover, I already told you why she did it. Everyone else did fail, and I'm close to clearing the mission. No, you said it yourself. That you'll leave everything to me. So don't go dying and leaving everything to me. It pisses me off. Kiet. Shin Woo could feel her anguish quite clearly. If she were still alive, then she would have gone completely nuts after hearing his story. Since she couldn't restrain her deep-seated hatred of the undead. But she was dying right now. Her life as a human being was already over, and she was progressively turning into an undead. That's why she could assess the situation calmly. And she realized that everything Shin Woo had been saying was true. No, she had actually realized before then. Perhaps, I had my suspicions, that you might be the heaven-defying general himself. If that were true, then it would explain all of my questions and all of your secrets. But I thought it was impossible. Since there was no way I would confuse a human with an undead. Since there was no way that you, who personified a hero who only showed up in stories, could be an undead. My acting was great, right? If I was honest and told my seniors that I was an undead, then they'd either try to kill me or attack me, so I couldn't tell them the truth. Ah, I trusted you. I thought a human that could completely purify the Empire had finally appeared. Her voice sounded lost, as if she were wandering through fog. He heard her bewilderment, and happily thought that he was indeed not normal. However, he couldn't help being happy. It was so sweet. Watching a woman who'd held on with only her belief as that belief shattered in front of her. I am planning on killing them all. And it doesn't really matter whether someone's dead or alive. How can you say that so nonchalantly? How are you unaffected by the undead curse? God's the one who made me like this. Isn't it because I have darkness resistance? The reason your older brother's relatively sane is because of the light element. On the contrary, it's more unbelievable that you were able to wield the light element with such ease. Though I've pretty much figured out why. Shin Woo wasn't the only one who revealed things about himself. Sarah also had to reveal her past or whatever her feelings were. Don't snoop around someone's thoughts as you please. I just shared some basic information for the contract. Easy for you to say. To think that you were this kind of person. I'm not a human, I'm a skeleton. I hate you. She was deeply affected by the curse not only because of how long she'd been down here, but also because she somewhat knew why the underground empire had turned out like this. The Emperor and Sagald, as well as the countless citizens of the underground empire. It was because of their greed and their obsession that led the empire to ruin. She had hated them from the very beginning. Thus, her hatred towards the undead was greater than anyone's, so much so that it devolved into madness. But now you know that there was an undead that stood against them from the very beginning. And that you can also become like that too. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Stop throwing a tantrum. If this goes on any further, then I won't be able to do anything for you anymore. You'll become a part of Anti-Skull. Considering the Annihilation Flame's effects on you and the curse, you'll become one of the top members of Anti-Skull. There's a high chance that you'll become unconditionally loyal to General Sagald. Their discussion of whether she wanted to form a contract with him and become an undead, or become a part of Anti-Skull and follow Sagald, was perhaps quite laughable. But at the very least, she shared a common goal with him, and he didn't really care what happened to her after that mutual goal was achieved. Whereas, Shin Woo didn't know what Sagald's goal was. He had no idea whether Sagald's goals differed or aligned with the Emperor's. But he did know that Anti-Skull was filled with psychos. He thought talking to her would be a pain while she was still alive, so he'd also thought about killing her, turning her into an undead, and then talking to her. I should have just killed her and taken her bones. It might not be so different. Shin Woo did his best to ensure that these thoughts remained hidden from Sarah. He didn't know if she knew what he was thinking, but she was still struggling to make her choice. So kill me before I become like that. You don't want revenge? You hated the undead so much. I can give you another chance, but you're just going to run away? But I'll have to become an undead. Shin Woo had been really curious about something and decided to ask. Perhaps it was more of a question to himself, who could define himself however he wished. If you yourself don't believe anything has changed about you, then what's the difference whether you're an undead or not? Are you taking some sort of regular qualifying examination or something? If not, then is it because the undead can't kill other undead? Or is it because undead can't fight for humanity? You're just biased towards the undead. You don't understand even after looking at me? No, you just don't want to accept it, right? That's what you call being stubborn. He wished she'd just agree already. Just undergoing the contract process allowed him to see about half her thoughts. Shin Woo was getting frustrated and asked curtly, "Do you want to live?" I do, but then there's your answer. Contract established. He didn't have any more time to waste with her. He still had some precious comrades of his to save. Shin Woo firmly declared. Then live. Think about the rest later. Hey, wait, no, this, Gua. Thus far, she had only experienced superficial pain. Because her own mana had been resisting the ambient mana, she hadn't turned into an undead. But once he finished speaking, the undead curse, the light, annihilation flame, and his mana equally covered her, initiating the change. Death had given her a kiss and passed by. And the next stage had come right after. You're just going to change a little bit. Gua, Sarah screamed, however, at the changes her body and soul were undergoing. The white light and the jet black darkness entwined together and began to change her body and soul. Geek. Oh, she's changing quite a bit. Shin Woo just watched vacantly as she let out her horrific screams, and enjoyed the fact that the mana explosion was more intense than he'd expected. Maybe it's more intense because she could originally use light? The undead opposed light. Thus, Sigald von Rededane, who possessed the light element, could act in opposition to his instincts as an undead. But at the same time, the process of becoming an undead must have been quite difficult for him. So, Shin Woo was relieved that he was supervising her undead transformation himself. He was an undead and the possessor of both the light and darkness elements, so he knew how to handle them so that they wouldn't oppose each other. He controlled the flow of mana that was changing her calmly and meticulously. Calmly follow me, calmly. It was a mysterious experience. It felt like he was creating Sarah's new body. And, in order to live, Sarah followed his instructions and moved her mana accordingly. Her human body, which had endured over several years, broke apart naturally and her mana began to construct a new body for her. It was more powerful than her old one and ironically, possessed more life force and magic than before. Like when Jin had reached level 8, Shin Woo used all of his innate abilities to create the body Sarah wanted. Good. It's going well. She really is beautiful. Fortunately, her starting point was really good, so he was able to create a new body for her without her physical appearance, features changing much. Her accumulated karma, her inventory, and her perium must have had an effect on her. The equipment she'd been wearing broke apart. In exchange, her naked body was covered by a deep gray dress. It was far greater than any equipment she'd worn in the past. Shin Woo felt it was actually something you would wear at a funeral, but it was indeed quite beautiful. Alright, we're all done. Could he call her an undead right now? It was hard to answer. In terms of her dying and coming back, she was indeed an undead, but he couldn't really say what the difference between her past body and her current body was. Her light element had remained unchanged, and was actually more powerful than before. In the process of destroying the Annihilation Flame's mana, a part of that mana was analyzed and imbued to her. Shin Woo was the same. What's worse, he had used his darkness after Sigald's attempt at converting her. Because Shin Woo had gone after Sigald's clumsy attempt, Sarah had become even more powerful than expected. Or, at least in terms of pure power. The LV8 undead Banshee Princess Sarah has been born and has entered a subordinate contract with you. You have analyzed another fusion element of light and fire. The high-rank light element has become LV6 and magic has increased by 20. The high-rank fire element has become LV7 and magic has increased by 20. The beginner shining flame element has become LV6 and magic has increased by 20. You have acquired a similarly leveled powerful subordinate. The high-rank command skill has become LV9 and all stats have increased by 5. After everything was over and Shin Woo had checked his messages, he took a look at Sarah and smiled bitterly. A banshee, that was truly a banshee. It really does fit you. Sarah had finally become a new entity, but it seemed as though she couldn't accept reality, as she continued screaming. As she cried, her eyes and her hair had, at some point, burned and turned into a dark gray, like used-up charcoal. I guess this is where you cry for a while. I understand, but you'll get in my way, so let's talk later. I don't understand anything. Why, yeah, you're going through puberty. I understand. Shin Woo thought of her as a young girl going through puberty. He waved his hand and the heaven door's key activated and sucked her in. Where did she go? That was something only Shin Woo and Sarah knew. Alright, now that the urgent stuff has been taken care of. Shin Woo, you're mine. Level 8 Banshee, he said, as if he were a Pokemon trainer, and then turned around. He saw Jin coming towards him. Fortunately, she was safe, but it seemed like she wouldn't be if things went on for just a little while longer. Come over here. At this rate, we'll all die. Alright, I got it. Sorry about that. Just hurry up. Shin Woo was, of course, not given any time to rest. He got atop Jin's back to fight against Sigald. Chapter 47. We got a new colleague. Prince looked around, dumbstruck. Everything had gone well since they'd separated from Shin Woo and entered the center of the city, so she didn't know how things had all gone to hell. It's a mess. Agreed. What was with that huge-ass cannon and the spirit general tied in the middle of it? Putting aside the archmage, who had appeared and summoned a ton of monsters as if waiting for them, why was the Annihilation Flame Sword God fighting against Sarah? They had expected her to go wild, as if she were a crazed woman, so they weren't as surprised. And where had Shin Woo gone? The heaven-defying general was supposedly helping him clean up the city, yet why had the heaven-defying general shown up with the metal god general, rather than him? Kracia, there are so many level 8s rampaging about. What can we even do? There's nothing we can do for now, Prince. Bring out the popcorn. Shin Woo had driven off the Lich, but the countless monsters he'd summoned still filled the battlefield. The golems and the Kai Pauls were diligently cutting down their numbers, but there were still so many of them that Kracia and Prince had a hard time dealing with all of them swarming the area. If the Archmage could summon an endless supply of monsters, then he could defeat any army. This was the true power of the Empire. The Archmage had already disappeared, but their fear of him hadn't. Popcorn? I don't know what that is. I don't really know what it is either. Shin Woo told me that it's something you eat when there's nothing you can do. So where did my junior go anyway? Shin Woo is. Kracia set her orb in the shape of an ice spear and cut apart the monsters nearby, then briefly looked at Shin Woo who had appeared beyond them. Shin Woo had grabbed onto Sarah von Rededane, whose heart had been pierced by the Empire's strongest general and was trying to do something. That's what she saw, but she felt like even someone as exceptional as Shin Woo wouldn't be able to save someone with a pierced heart. Prince asked another question as if she'd noticed where Kracia was looking. And seriously, what is that? Is he really on our side? He seems like he's trying to help us. It really does seem like he's helping Sarah. Why? Why is an undead helping us? I think we'll find out soon enough. Wait a sec, do you know something? What did you do as you traveled with my junior? I can't stand it, there's so much I don't know. Fire demon. Prince's mana responded to her cry of pent-up frustration and manifested a fire demon onto the battlefield once more. Through Kracia's special training, she had succeeded in modifying her summoning magic, which had been passed down through her family. Because of that, she was able to summon the fire demon without cross-dressing. The fire demon was more powerful than before, yet the mana consumption was lower. This was all due to Kracia's help in fixing the structure of her summoning magic. The unnecessary formulas that had been added as it was passed along were removed, and a more efficient magic formula was added through Kracia's in-depth knowledge of another world's magic. Thus, she could bring out the fire demon's maximum power. And with this, Prince now possessed power befitting a level 7 magician. I thought I'd gotten stronger, but, this is crazy. Of course, Prince was plenty strong, as she possessed magic befitting her level and also had her family's secret art. It was just that the people here were the most powerful individuals in the Empire. All the more reason why she couldn't stand it. The only way she could further develop was through time. Lloyd and Arian seemed relaxed, as they weren't aware of this, but Prince knew that there would soon be a battle that would determine the fate of the Empire. She couldn't afford to just lollygag around, especially if she wanted to do even a little bit more during that climactic battle. Prince. What? Then, Kracia called Prince with her usual calm and composed voice. Prince yelled sharply in response and turned around, but noticed that Kracia was pointing at a certain spot. Look at that, the spirit general? I saw her before. She didn't seem like she'd be an immediate threat, or that's what I thought, but what's with her? Just a little while ago, the spirit general remained tied on the cannon, but now, she was letting out bizarre cries and was twisting her body around. The cannon responded in kind. Her struggle caused the cannon's accumulated mana to struggle as well. It had already been tense, but that tension had risen instantaneously. Why were they tense? They felt as though the cannon's mana would burst forth and evaporate everything in the area. If all of the undead curse within it explodes, then we'll definitely become undead, right? We'll be lucky to retain our forms as undead. There's a high chance we'll be broken down on an atomic level and disappear. Don't say something like that. Why did it become like that? There's a high chance it's the Archmage's doing. When the Archmage's body was destroyed by Shin, the heaven-defying general, he must have given the Spirit General an order. It was probably a forceful activation. Kracia was right on the mark. Ever since the level 8 Spirit General was tied to the cannon, the palace became capable of forcing orders upon her. And that authority was also given to the Archmage as well. And when he'd been defeated by Shin Woo, he ordered the Spirit General to fire, in order to eliminate all that threatened the Empire in one fell swoop. It was regrettable that the royal family would lose such a powerful weapon, but if the Annihilation Flame Sword God, the Metal God General, and the Heaven-defying General were to all die here, then the Emperor would have no other enemies remaining. We have to stop it. Kracia saw the Metal God General and Jin fight against the Annihilation Flame Sword God, as well as Shin Woo struggling to keep Sarah alive, and nodded her head as if she'd made a hard decision. How? Let's freeze her for now. If we stop the progress in its tracks, then Shin Woo will take care of the rest. I shouldn't be saying this, but aren't you depending on my junior a bit too much? We're partners. Open a path, Prince. TCH. Easy for you to say. If it was so easy, then I would have done it already, she wanted to say, but she raised her hands anyway so that she could fulfill Kracia's request. Then, a section of the nearby monsters vanished and the Kai Pauls appeared. We'll assist you, as per Lord Paul Zero's orders. I assume we have to stop that woman, right? Yeah, please. Got it. Once they met, Prince opened her eyes wide. Although she should have hated the undead, she didn't really bear any hostility towards these chimeras. A part of it was that the Kai Pauls had grown such that they could hide their death energy, but it was more that Prince had undergone a fundamental change. She couldn't understand it herself and looked on dumbfounded. The Kai Pauls just ignored her and charged forward. Their bodies were veiled in flames. This is the power that Lord Paul Zero bestowed upon us. Kill all those who go against him. Yu, open a path. This is the order he gave us. Ku. The Chimera Avengers charged, veiled in at least level 5 intermediate flames. Though the monsters were no pushovers, they could not withstand the Kai Paul's might and just burned away. Prince watched them and briefly hesitated, but she soon bit her lip and extended her hand towards them. Fire Demon, become their flame. Her spell just looked like a summon, but it was more of an amalgamation of her family's will and mana. If she could control that will freely, then it didn't matter how the Fire Demon was manifested. And Prince, who possessed high proficiency in the spell, could share the Fire Demon's power with others. The Fire Demon followed her will and was absorbed by the Kai Pauls, strengthening their flames to its utmost. What tremendous heat! All right, we're quickening our pace. Follow me. Good job, Prince. HMPH. Sarah's already shown me what happens when you go crazy over the undead, so I can't do something stupid after seeing that. Yeah, that's right. Perhaps the reason Prince could remain so calm in spite of all this was because she'd seen how stupid Redidane had acted. While she nodded in understanding, Kracia gripped her orb with both hands and infused her mana into it. At the same time, she began casting. It is through the Winter Queen's grace that all creation remains in place. Her breath freezes blood and covers the skin with snow. You should have told me in advance, you bad. Although the Kai Pauls were tearing through the monsters, the two of them weren't safe. Prince maintained her spell, reinforcing herself and the Kai Pauls, but also cast another spell to protect her and Kracia. Fortunately, the Kai Pauls, strengthened by her Fire Demon, had brought them to the cannon before her barrier was broken. The Spirit General's struggles intensified, and even now, the vibrations of the cannon's accumulated magic was shaking their collars. It'll really blow. Hurry up and do something, Kracia. I'm done. Absolute freeze. Kracia extended both her hands and forcefully threw her orb. The orb broke into pieces midair, transforming into countless ice crystals, and rushed towards the Spirit General. The monsters attempted to stop her, but the Kai Pauls and Prince stopped them in their tracks, allowing her spell to go unhindered and freeze the Spirit General. She had put everything she had into that spell, freezing both the Spirit General's movements and even her mana at the same time. Ah, Gua, Kook, she's resisting. Prince, give me your magic. Yeah, sure, here, take it all, why don't you? As a result of their special training, the two could now transfer mana to each other. Kracia took all of Prince's mana without leaving a single drop, converted it into ice, and used it on the Spirit General. Although the Spirit General was a level 8, she was just an empty doll following orders, so she couldn't properly resist Kracia's high-rank spell. Her movements were completely restricted. The flow of her exploding mana slightly ever so slightly calmed down. Did it work? You just jinxed it, Prince. Why? Both Prince and Kracia were exhausted, as if they'd fall over on the spot. Although they were breathing heavily, they still joked around. She didn't actually think it would fail. Kracia's spell had been perfect, and the Spirit General's mana had been completely restrained. So long as the Archmage didn't come back, she wouldn't be able to break through it. Impressive spell, hero. Because of you, I can use this weapon more easily than before. Prince just had to jinx it. They then saw the Annihilation Flame Sword God atop the cannon. Though his armor was in tatters and rotten white blood flowed from his body, he seemed like he had energy to spare. Prince immediately searched for any traces of the Metal God General, found him injured on the ground and sighed. She didn't know why he had helped them, but he wasn't able to prevent Sarah's death or restrain the Annihilation Flame Sword God. He was completely useless. I thought I'd have to do much more, but to think you used such an impressive magic formula to restrain her. You would be a good fit in Anti-Skull. Regrettably, I already have a previous engagement after I die, Kracia declared firmly, even in the midst of the Annihilation Flame Sword God's overwhelming pressure. He seemed even more taken by her grit, as he smiled. Is that so? You'll probably change your mind once you die. Like my little sister did. Your little sister isn't here anymore. Kayak. The Annihilation Flame Sword God fell from the cannon. In his stead, Shin Woo and Jin had appeared. Jin had brought him here at just the right time. Wait, my little sister is. The Annihilation Flame Sword God barely recovered from a lightspeed kick, looked around, and yelled in shock. Of course, Sarah could no longer be seen on the battlefield, as Shin Woo had sent her away with his Heaven Door's key. The Annihilation Flame Sword God probably had no idea what had happened to her. Since he still didn't completely comprehend the heaven-defying general's power. What did you do with my little sister? Your little sister died, just as you wanted. I couldn't save her, no matter what I did. Though I'm not so sure your little sister will be yours after death. Shin Woo said angrily and gripped his death god's shining bone sword. There was an incredible amount of mana within. It was a fitting weapon to use against the Annihilation Flame Sword God. But that's all. Don't think you can just make a mess on my stage and leave as you please, Sigald von Rededane. I can't just leave, since there's still something I want. The Annihilation Flame Sword God smiled and gripped his own sword. His Annihilation Flame blazed and his presence was erased from the world once more. In a sense, he was stronger than the Garuda. Shin Woo gritted his teeth and charged at him. The impact between Annihilation Flame and Dark Shadow boomed, resounding far and wide as if signaling the start of their battle. Too shallow, Sigald declared. You've learned some good skills and accumulated some experience as well. But that's all. You don't have the basics down, so everything you do is sloppy. Shut up. Shin Woo and Sigald's blades clashed in the air and erupted in intense flames. No, that's what he thought, but at that moment, Sigald's sword was coming for Shin Woo's helmet. If he hadn't responded with his darkness and stopped it, then the battle would have been decided right then and there. And only your elements are strong. But do you know something? That your mana, which you thought was infinite when you reached level 8, will eventually run out. I wonder how much energy and mana you had to waste to block my attack. You can only attain victory after you've calculated and distributed your power. The problem was that this had been repeated a few times already. I had an inkling, but this guy, Shin Woo, wasn't a good match for him. The fact that he was skilled in the light element wasn't the issue. The problem was his innate element, the Annihilation Flame. The Annihilation Flame was a technique that erased oneself. It looked as convoluted as Shin Woo's innate elements, but it was actually quite simple. It would act as if you weren't there, even if you were. Conversely, it would seem as if you were there, even if you weren't. In other words, it was fundamentally similar to Shin Woo. It was based on trickery. They're similar, but oppose each other. Annihilation Flame was, in a sense, the greatest stealth tool at a glance. The user could erase only a select part of themselves and fool their opponent, and during that time, they can do whatever they wish. He had fooled Shin Woo into thinking that their swords would clash, but he was actually aiming for Shin Woo's helmet. He must have erased truth. It really was a pain in the ass to face in CQC. But if he widened the distance between them, Sigald would attack his allies. It was really a frustrating situation. He never had any intention of walking atop my stage. Wild card was a skill that could lead him to certain victory only if he knew everything there was to know about his opponent. However, Sigald kept erasing himself from Shin Woo's stage, which made it difficult to ascertain what was real. Even now, Sigald was acting as though they were fighting face to face, but that probably wasn't real. His goal wasn't to kill Shin Woo but to control the cannon. He wanted to find an opportunity to use the cannon. If you look away, you'll die. Ha, you're quite sharp. If that's the case, Shin Woo swung his sword, imbuing his sword with his dark flame. Dark Shadow's level was still too low, so it couldn't fend off Sigald's annihilation flame. However, Dark Flame would weaken Sigald's flames whenever their swords clashed. And that's exactly what happened. The moment their swords clashed, the Dark Flame mixed with the annihilation flame, creating a new current that Sigald wasn't aware of. Sigald's power was really a good match for his wildcard skill. Shin Woo inwardly smiled and thrust his sword once more. Ha, kook, this is. After that brief exchange, Shin Woo had, for the first time, broken Sigald's shoulder armor. Shin Woo's lie and Sigald's lie had resonated, which ultimately confused Sigald. Sigald knew that Shin Woo had used his power against him, and he was even more flustered because of it. Shin Woo had gained the upper hand and continued with the resonance of their elements. Dark Flame with lightning, Annihilation Flame with ice, and finally, Shin Woo was able to grasp Sigald's true body. He broke Sigald's armor, the broken pieces fluttering in the wind. Sigald quickly used his Annihilation Flame to avoid the attack and looked at Shin Woo. Is it a stealing ability? I wonder. I may just be fooling you. Ha, it's power befitting the title of Heaven Defying. Did you force all your opponents into this kind of situation? Sigald did his best to act calm and reply nonchalantly but was quickly doing some calculations in his head. His opponent's special ability was on par with, or perhaps even greater than his own. However, he was still superior when it came to basic combat abilities. If that's the case, then if he were to attack him such that he couldn't defend and then take that opportunity to control the cannon, then no, he couldn't ignore the level 7 elite magician, flaming chimeras, and the golems, who were just waiting for their opportunity to strike. If it was all going according to plan, then those golems would have been on my side, but Tarion, you idiot, they figured out what your true intentions were. That much is obvious, since he's not with them. Ah, Tarion, you made things so much harder for me. The inside of his head was becoming quite busy. But there was still a way out of this. He knew there was a chance that a single squad wouldn't be able to accomplish its mission, so he had some reserve troops stationed nearby. He had ordered them to advance after taking care of all the traps, so they should join the battlefield soon. And when they do, there'll be chaos. If he were to use that chaos to subdue the heaven-defying general and then take control of the cannon, then he'd be able to achieve his goal. But the only problem was that they were quite delayed. TCH, your swords become restless. That creates an opening. Everything you say pisses me off. Whereas Shin Woo was seething. He couldn't even defeat Sigald when he was diverting his attention away from their battle. He wasn't a match for Sigald in terms of overall stats or fundamental combat abilities, aside from magic. The only reason he was able to match up against him was because Jin balanced out his stats. He pushed back with his innate skills, which were based around magic, but Sigald's innate element was no pushover. Contrary to Sigald's expectations, Shin Woo still had plenty of mana left over and could attack as soon as Sigald's mana bottomed out. However, Sigald was no fool, and he would probably retreat if his mana ran low. He was that skilled. Honestly, his opponent was well-rounded. To be more specific, he was kind of like Shin Woo. If just a little bit. A warrior only needs to be good at CQC, so why the hell does he have to use his Annihilation Flame too? He was one to talk. He knew that, but it pissed him off anyway. Shin Woo might have been able to overpower him if his manetization skill had reached level 5. If his Dark Shadow or Shining Flame were at the intermediate stage, he would have also been able to deal with Sigald's Annihilation Flame with ease and burn his body to a crisp. Acting like you're the one being pushed back? It might work against someone else, but it won't work on me. As stated, The Annihilation Flame Sword God's objective was the cannon. He would act as though he were being pushed back, but if he had the opportunity, he would jump on it and head towards the cannon. The moment Li Shin Woo gave Sigald the opportunity, it would be game over. If that's the case, then, since he was out of options, he had no choice but to use his final resort. He summoned all the weapons he'd been saving. Li Shin Woo gritted his teeth and spoke to his partner. "Let's go, Jin." "Got it." She knew that the Annihilation Flame Sword God wasn't to be taken lightly, so she answered seriously and readied herself. Her steel wings fluttered and they rushed towards Sigald like a bullet. Kook. At the same time, a dozen of Li Shin Woo's weapons came out from within the surrounding darkness and flew towards Sigald all at once. Li Shin Woo had been saving these weapons until now. There was no way even Sigald could have expected this. Each and every one of them contains a huge amount of mana. What kind of power is this? Heaven-defying general. What was most frightening about it was that they were all at least level 7. The startled Sigald used his Annihilation Flame and erased himself from that spot. However, Li Shin Woo had expected him to do so and launched his weapons in all directions. Li Shin Woo had summoned all of his weapons because he'd expected this prior. He'd experienced Sigald's Annihilation Flame a few times already, so the moment his weapons touched him, it would become easy to figure out where he was. "Found you, heaven-defying general." In the end, one of the death god's shining bone swords found him. It had only pierced his shoulder, but Li Shin Woo then used the mana accumulated within the death god's shining bone sword to use its active skill. The skill's name was Death God's Fury. It was a skill that he can only use by infusing a ton of mana into the sword. It would sever any magical or spatial interference and slash anything that was within his vision. It was the best skill to use against Sigald. Kahak. That's only the beginning. He wasn't sure if Sigald knew or not, but Li Shin Woo possessed 8 other shining bone swords, aside from the one on his person. Moreover, so long as the swords were infused with enough mana, he could keep using the skill to ignore any spatial and magical interference and keep attacking him. It wasn't just one slash. He was simultaneously hit by 7 more slashes. Each and every strike was incredibly powerful, and if Sigald wasn't a wielder of light, then he would have died right then and there. Kuok. Jin. I know. That wasn't the end. Li Shin Woo and Jin charged forward, right as the shining bone swords did their job. She turned ridiculously fast once she found her target. Jin stepped on the air, turned her body, kicked off the air once more, and charged towards Sigald. She converted all of her mana into light and put everything she had into her sprint. That was her light. At this very moment, nothing existed that could surpass her speed. TCH. But once they made contact with Sigald, Li Shin Woo clicked his tongue. Sigald's body crumpled from his attack, but he realized that it was just a clump of Annihilation Flame. He wasn't even a ninja, so what's with the body replacement technique? That bastard ran away. Oh, he really did. He might have run away once he'd been hit by the shining bone swords. Sigald had realized that he couldn't defeat Li Shin Woo with his Annihilation Flame alone and had chosen to retreat. Sigald had probably used some sort of escape artifact that activated through the use of his Annihilation Flame. He had even used Wildcard a few times, yet his opponent had still gotten away. How humiliating. Should we follow him? He's gotten quite far away. To think he'd even abandoned the troops that had come to save him. In case of any reinforcements, Li Shin Woo had put his pals on standby. He got their report and just sighed. They had discovered Anti-Skull beforehand and were engaged in battle. Just recently, they had begun to disperse and retreat. Sigald must have ordered their retreat once he'd escaped. He must have been sure that Li Shin Woo would have followed him if he were to go and save them personally. As expected, he was quite smart. He really was like Li Shin Woo. Kai Paul Squad, Anti-Skull is fighting against our forces in the west. Take care of them. Don't let any of them escape. Understood. Once they received their orders, the Kai Pauls mobilized immediately. Li Shin Woo cleaned up the rest of the Archmage's summoned monsters in their stead by blowing up his remaining weapons. In the blink of an eye, the battle was over and the battlefield had become silent. Now that he thought about it, it wasn't entirely over. There was still the spirit general that needed to be taken care of, She had broken through Kracia's spell and was twisting her body around in order to execute the Archmage's order. He had worked so hard, yet he couldn't rest yet. The Archmage and the Annihilation Flame Sword God had gotten away, but he wasn't even able to remain pissed in peace. "Hey, you," he gritted his teeth, rotated in the air, and approached the Spirit General. Then, Prince raised her staff while shaking and pointed at Shin Woo. "Where did my junior go? Give him back, huh?" Kracia sighed deeply and hit the back of her neck. Prince fainted as if she were in a comic book. Normally, one wouldn't black out from that. Shin Woo looked on vacantly, and Kracia just responded calmly. "Let's take care of that first and then talk." All right, all the troublesome people were gone now. He hadn't figured out what the Annihilation Flame Sword God intended to do with the cannon, but now was the time to deal with the source of all the chaos. "Jin, let's just back off. You don't think you can absorb all of the undead curse within the cannon, do you?" "Nope. If it were just her, then I might be able to do something about it, but the curse will flow into her from the cannon anyway, so there's no point. I'm trying my best here, but it's too much. Jin, it's dangerous to absorb it so recklessly. My stasis magic will wear off." "Ah, that's right, Kracia, good job." Of course, her application of first aid was top-notch. She didn't simply freeze her target, she had completely halted the Spirit General from using any of her power, which included both her magic and her physical strength. It felt like she'd used the time element as well. Perhaps Shin Woo had been looking down on the ice element thus far. He could wield the LV1 high-rank ice element, but that wasn't something he could boast about in front of Kracia. This woman's lost it too. Where should I even start? Her ominous, yet beautiful black hair was disheveled, and her widened, golden eyes evoked a creepy feeling, and the princess continued to cry out. Shin Woo had, from the very beginning, assumed that she wouldn't be okay, but her condition was a lot worse than he'd expected. After all, she had been used as a battery and an energy cable for the cannon for dozens of years, which had worn away at both her body and her mind. In other words, the contract had been in place before the fall of the Empire. That's what had caused her to be in such a sorry state. So he's willing to use his daughter or anything at his disposal to go to the surface, huh? He recalled what Sarah had said before. That Sagald was willing to use his fiancée for his goals. If his goal involved using the cannon, then she was right. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and placed his hand on the cannon. As expected, he didn't own the cannon, so he couldn't change it into bone. Honestly, he'd already tried it before fighting Sagald. It was because he knew that he couldn't change it into bone that he had been so anxious during his fight. He was getting pissed again. "Sagald, I'll kill you no matter what." "Shin Woo, you talking like that makes you sound more like an undead." He's never lost his prey before, but he lost 2 of them at once, so that's probably why he's like that. You were able to drive them away without losing the cannon pretty much unscathed. I feel like that's a decisive victory in your favor, Shin Woo. Whereas, Kracia and Jin, who couldn't do anything more, just calmly conversed and watched on. The golems were standing behind them in order to protect the Metal God General. Kracia glanced at them and then asked Jin, "How did you talk them into this? They're completely subservient to Shin Woo. He took advantage of their weakness, they're just helping us out temporarily." Sounds like something a villain would do. Kracia had no idea how Shin Woo had grasped one of the 4 heavenly commanders' weaknesses and forced him to do his bidding, but because Jin looked clueless as well, she didn't ask her anything else. It really didn't matter, so long as they didn't come attacking them. "So Shin Woo, do you think it's impossible?" I have to take care of this woman first. Then I can move on to the next step. Are you going to brainwash her too?" "Hey, don't put it that way. It makes me sound like a weirdo." All he was doing was changing her mind a little bit and turning her into a completely different person than before. Shin Woo ignored Kracia's rude remark and focused on the princess once more. Fortunately, it was much easier to deal with her than Sarah. Her contract was forced onto her through the darkness element, so I can easily deal with it. It's a relief it's not complicated. Shin Woo stretched his hand and placed it upon the princess's forehead. Darkness covered her, an amount similar to when he'd transformed Sarah into a banshee, and he immediately erased the contract that bound her. "You don't need to be tied to the cannon any longer. You don't need to listen to the Emperor's or the Archmage's orders any longer. I'm erasing all illegitimate contracts. The deep-seated curse, which had bound her mind and body for dozens of years, was erased by a deeper darkness. At that moment, her wide-open golden eyes returned to normal. Her eyes gleamed with a faint intellect, and widened even further when she looked into Li Shin Woo's goblin fire. Terror and hatred, anger and fear, her eyes reflected the amalgamation of all these emotions. If he knew she'd have responded like this, then he'd have turned back into a human. Li Shin Woo slightly regretted his lack of foresight and quickly said, "The mana inside of this damn cannon's going to explode, so don't say anything and follow my instructions. You don't want to die when you've just gotten your sanity back, right?" Was it because she hadn't been able to speak for dozens of years? Fortunately, she was able to understand Li Shin Woo because of the link between them and nodded her head. She then began to control her mana. Even if it's rotten, it's still a herring. She was able to return her mana to normal and circulate it throughout her body. Once she began to properly circulate the mana throughout her body, her ruined body regained a bit of its strength back. As expected, the effects of mana were truly amazing. But there was a problem. The amount of mana she could control was far less than the cannon's capacity. No matter what she did, the cannon's mana wouldn't obey her commands. It made sense, she was only the trigger. It didn't matter when they pulled the trigger. What mattered was that they had already pulled the trigger, activating the cannon. Li Shin Woo realized that after coming into contact with her, now he had no choice but to do something about the cannon himself. "Hey, do you have a good way of dealing with this?" She was made aware of the situation by Li Shin Woo but shook her head as tears streamed down her face. Because she had just realized what she'd done for dozens of years, she wasn't in the right state of mind. She, who had possessed the title of Spirit Princess, had sucked away the spirit's life force and turned it into destructive power. She couldn't show her face to the spirits, who had once been her friends. She was in no condition to be stopping the cannon. The spirits? Of course, her friends had mostly been killed by Li Shin Woo and company, allowing them to be at peace, but it probably wouldn't be a good idea to tell her that right now. Li Shin Woo grabbed onto the evil eye chain that connected her and the cannon and said, "You can mourn them later. But if you die here, then you won't be able to do anything. And you can't take your revenge on the ones who did this to you either. If you want to take revenge on the ones who did this to the underground spirits, then you have to survive." Revenge? That's right, Kreisha and Jin, who were watching from behind, said, "It's finally started," and chattered on. But Li Shin Woo just ignored them and continued. "The people who forced you underground. And the people who led the empire to its ruin. The ones who forced you to sacrifice your friends. All the people who used you. They're still living and breathing, so are you just going to wallow away in self-pity and die?" But, and there are still some spirits that are alive here. Going at it this way got a better reaction out of her. Li Shin Woo took this opportunity and pushed forward. "You have to stop this if you want to save them. It's not just the underground. The spirits on the surface are waiting for you to rescue them." Living spirits. Her voice was becoming firmer and her eyes were becoming clearer. Dana von Etleber was the Empire's greatest elementalist. She could tell that Li Shin Woo not only wielded several elements but was also connected with several spirits as well. For some reason, that fact reinvigorated her. How can an undead contract? No, I shouldn't be talking about other people when I'm in this state. "Oh, your echo's gone now. It seems like you're back." Although her complexion was still ghastly and she hadn't been released of her delayed undead transformation state, she had regained her mind completely. Li Shin Woo nodded his head in satisfaction and she said the words he had been waiting for. "I want to live, please help me. I was waiting for you to say that. I'm glad you're a lot easier to deal with than that old bag." "All right, then, let's save you first. Kreisha, I'm going to pull this woman out, so use your stasis magic on the cannon one more time." "Easy for you to say." First, Li Shin Woo pulled off the evil eye chains that bound her to the cannon. If she couldn't control the cannon, then he was better off just releasing her from it. The chains had originally been tied with a complicated spell, but due to his control over darkness he was able to pull them out with ease. Then, he superimposed his previous fragment of evil eye with this one, creating a single grain. Next up, "How did you Dana von Etleber couldn't believe her sudden freedom and looked dumbfounded. But that wasn't the end. Now that her link with the canon was broken, the undead curse was quickly descending upon her in order to transform her into an undead. She, who hadn't been picked by God, would turn into an undead if he didn't do anything. If her condition was even a little bit better, then he and Jin could have continuously sucked the curse out of her and prolonged her life, but she was in terrible shape, so a makeshift method wouldn't work. So, I have no choice but to try an experimental method. Shin Woo immediately extended his hand towards her and used his dark shadow. If he were to simultaneously eliminate as much of the curse as possible while also giving her an ability to repel the curse, then she could live. He'd failed with Sarah, but he couldn't afford to fail a second time. You can't reject this power. It'll nullify the mana that's attempting to turn you into an undead. I understand, but is that really possible? A deeper darkness consumes the weaker one. Eventually, dark shadow covered the princess's body and imbued it with darkness. The princess didn't resist the energy. In fact, she used her own mana to supplement it. Befitting an elementalist who had controlled countless spirits, she seemed confident in harmonizing her own mana with another person's. It was quite relieving for Shin Woo. A body which can't be infiltrated by the curse. He hadn't understood this before, but now that he understood it, the idea behind it was quite simple. Couldn't he just copy the blessing God had given him? Dark shadow, which possessed the power to reverse all cause and effect, had the ability to do so. Dana's case was different from Sarah's. Sarah's body had been all but dead, and her mana and physical body had sustained critical damage. She had been putting off her death. However, Dana's body, which had been in contact with the undead curse for dozens of years, was, at this point, neither dead nor alive. Her body was extremely vulnerable to the undead curse but was also the optimal container for an ability that repelled it. Of course, it should be impossible to bestow this karma upon someone without being God herself, but Shin Woo was able to do it. Wild card. This was the third change, following Jin and Sarah. Whenever he used it, he felt himself becoming more familiar with it. He could do this regularly now. But there was one issue here, that this was a contract created through the darkness element. Is it really okay? To be frank, I'd like to hear more before I make a decision. But if I don't do as you say, then I'll become an undead just like Sigald, Fiotane, or my father. If that's the case, then I have to live first, no matter what happens in the future. You told Sarah before that she had to live first too. Ah, you were listening? Moreover, I feel like I'm fated to be with you. You're the last remaining elementalist in this dead world. I can feel how happy the spirits are through their memories. I'd like to believe in that. And please introduce those girls to me later. As expected, he should have just said he was an elementalist like her. That was all it took to convince her. It had gone so much more smoothly than his time with Sarah that it moved him to tears. And then, Shin Woo began her transformation in earnest. Of course, the change was a lot smaller than with Sarah. Because she wasn't a hero, she hadn't accumulated much karma. Plus, he had managed to steal a large quantity of mana from the canon. With the addition of his dark shadow, her body and mind were given a small advantage, that's all. Reject death, survive. The combination of Shin Woo's authority, which distorted reality, Dana von Etleber's miraculous body, which bordered between life and death, and her incredible mana ability. All of those factors mixed together and created a miracle. Something that hadn't existed in the world was born once more. Ah! A blinding light burst forth. Immediately after, her body was covered in darkness. There was pretty much no change to her outward appearance, but Shin Woo knew that she was a completely different existence than before. You have created the LV8 immortal Princess Dana, and have formed a subordinate contract with her. While this was only possible because the target aided you with her own will and ability, you have succeeded in creating a never-before-seen species. The immortal, a high-rank species that lives between the border of life and death, and is closer to death than any other, yet has avoided death and lives. This embodies the way you yourself live. As their creator, they will give you unlimited love and esteem. You have acquired the title, Species Creator, and all stats have increased by 100. You have fulfilled a portion of the requirements in achieving the fusion element between light and darkness. The Rebellion skill has become LV8 and all stats have increased by 30. When you meet the conditions of the Rebellion skill, all stats increase by 24%. with his rebellion skill going up by 2 levels in one go, overall. It felt like God would scold him for this, but like always, Shin Woo didn't let it bother him and just decided to move on. LV8 Immortal Princess Dana. Immortals are a species that has avoided death. They possess a perfect body that can switch between a spirit's astral body and a human's physical body. They are also able to wield the darkness element proficiently. As they are fated to live one step away from death, most lethal curses and poisons are ineffective against them and they age extremely slowly. Just their very existence distorts the world's cause and effect, and the world is at risk of collapse if too many are gathered. While they have a long lifespan, their reproductive rate is low. The beginner dark shadow element has become LV9. Magic has increased by 20. Wow, that's awesome. I want to be an immortal too. You're already an undead. A new species had been born. It was a bewildering achievement, but the wavelength was truly amazing. It wasn't just an amazing karma for her, but for Shin Woo, the one who'd achieved the feat, as well. It felt like he'd constructed a bridge, allowing them to go somewhere they couldn't before. It was a mysterious feeling, as though his potential had expanded. In other words, this was the first case where Shin Woo had fooled the world with the Joker's innate skills. Immortal, whereas, the previous Dana von Edleber, now the immortal Princess Dana, looked over her body. She was astonished as she absorbed the relevant information that flowed through her mind. She was neither human nor undead. Her mind and body possessed a completely different authority from them. Dana could now switch between her astral body and her physical body as well as avoid death. Her new abilities were so amazing that she couldn't comprehend them. Ah, you definitely got that from me. I haven't perfected that ability yet, so why did she? Maybe it's because of the subject's condition? You said she was in a unique situation. She was exposed to the undead curse for dozens of years without God's blessing, yet she survived regardless. Do you really think there'd be another case underground of a human surviving that long? That's true, but could you not use the word, subject? Jin spoke sullenly and Shin Woo replied with a bitter smile. By now, he'd mostly figured out how she ticked. Whenever he spoke to another girl or he engaged in any sort of skinship with them, Jin's mood would sour. Wow, this is quite the mysterious feeling. But I'm sure it's not due to my long-awaited freedom. I wanted to be free, but how could I pay you back for such a gift? I'm glad you're so amazed at your new body and all, but even an immortal will die if this thing blows. Focus on this now. That's right. Of course, saving the princess was quite a big deal, but Shin Woo's original goal was to calm down the cannon which would soon blow. Dana was so shocked by her rebirth as an immortal that she'd completely forgotten the current situation, but she was alerted thanks to Shin Woo's request. Because an immortal could freely choose their bodily state, she was currently floating in the air with ease. Kracia, how is it? Who, now, you ask? My bad. While Shin Woo was busy saving Dana, Kracia had been keeping the cannon at bay. She gritted her teeth and looked over towards them. She had assimilated her orb and had been converting all of her mana into ice. She'd managed to slow down the mana, but she'd used way too much mana today, so she was approaching her limit. You asked, how is it? It feels like it'll blow any minute now. I'll help a bit. Shin Woo had also used a ton of mana today, but he gathered more mana and helped Kracia with her stasis magic, looking like it didn't bother him in the least. Because he could use the high-rank ice element, he was able to help her pretty easily, but this is just a temporary solution. Unfortunately, it's impossible to stop the cannon once it's been activated. Now that it's come to this, we have no choice but to get rid of the energy. Alright, then let's focus on that. Shin Woo retraced his steps. First, this 100-meter tall cannon had activated its accumulated mana and was about to blow. Second, the mana it had gathered from the denizens of Byron, as well as the spirits, had been contaminated and stored within. Third, once the mana had been activated, stopping it was impossible. It had to fire somewhere. What if we stop it and run away? We could, huh? Kracia had asked without much thought, and Shin Woo agreed much the same. Then, Kracia looked at him vacantly, though it was difficult to tell the difference with her, as she normally had a pretty neutral expression. We can, yep, of course, we can't get away by just running. Even Jin can't get away from the blast running at top speed. Of course, Li Shin Woo and Jin both possessed resurrection abilities, but the cannon was so powerful that they would probably die more than a few times. What about the others? They would die without question. Even Dana von Edleber, who'd just been reborn as an immortal, would die too. It wasn't something that even she, as someone who'd barely avoided death, could survive. But I can transport us somewhere else with the Heaven Door's key, a place where the blast won't reach us. Then can't we just run away? But there's a maximum occupancy. If we took the Heaven Door's key, then I'd have to sacrifice all the Pauls and Golems. And Li Shin Woo didn't want that. Not only did he still have a use for Arama, he didn't want his loyal Pauls to die here. Above all, he couldn't allow this much energy to go to waste. So there are things that even the heaven-defying general can't do, huh? Oh, you're awake. Arama Steelworker had awoken, but he probably wouldn't be helpful in the current situation. However, he decided upon a course of action that Li Shin Woo hadn't expected. Arama Steelworker aimed his fist at him. He'd collected a considerable amount of energy at the end of his fist. Why was he doing this now? Li Shin Woo tilted his head as he couldn't understand why. What are you doing? I heard everything. I'll die here anyway, and you're trying to run away. If that's the case, then I have only one job. To bury you, and even my body, here. I, Arama Steelworker, cannot retreat, even against you. Ah, now that he thought about it, one could interpret their conversation that way. Li Shin Woo's intention was more along the lines of, at this rate, we'll all die, so let's all find a different way out of this, but Arama and the Golems had interpreted it as, the Golems will all die here anyway. The situation had become pointlessly complicated. Arama, it seems like you're misunderstanding something. If possible, I'm going to save you guys too. To do that, that's just an excuse. You left your enemies behind you and talked without a second thought. You only have yourself to blame. Geez, it looked like you wouldn't be able to clear up the misunderstanding. This was no time to be fighting amongst themselves, yet Arama Steelworker had collected a ton of metal mana and launched it towards him regardless. However, before Li Shin Woo could waste his time fighting Arama, someone else had stood in front of him. It was none other than Dana. Arama, know your place. This is no place for you, a golem and a dirty follower of the surface. You survived, princess, but what can an elementalist do without any spirits? She didn't have any spirits on hand, but Li Shin Woo had bestowed upon her a high concentration of darkness element mana. Although it was her first time wielding said element, she extended the darkness forward and absorbed Arama's attack. At the same time, she launched dozens of darkness chains towards him and immobilized him. Kahak, you were always weak to elemental mana. That must be why you always hated elementalists like myself. I wonder just how humiliating it must have been for you. Kook, this darkness. You didn't. Heaven-defying general, you bastard. What did you do to this woman? To think you'd be looking elsewhere during our fight. It seems you've grown. Help our lord, my lord. Arama's golems rushed into the fray. Li Shin Woo was busy enough dealing with the cannon as is. Li Shin Woo gritted his teeth and launched his remaining weapons, killing the weakest golems with ease. He'd only let them live, as he felt like he'd find a use for them later, but it was quite laughable to see them rushing forward. Kai Paul. At the same time, he didn't forget to send a message to his subordinate. I'm listening, Lord Paul 0. What's the situation over there? They had 3 level 7 elites, but we've just finished dealing with their entire force. We're in the middle of collecting all the loot. Alright, good. As he thought, Anti-Skull was dangerous. There were 6 level 7 elites that had entered into the inner city. If Li Shin Woo hadn't brought enough troops, then he would have been the one that had lost. No, the loot wasn't important right now. Their most important battle lay in front of them. I keep telling you to come and go. Sorry about that, Kai Paul. But I have good news for you this time. Are you saying that? That's right. You guys will have to take care of the golems personally. I can do it myself, but I'm busy dealing with something a bit more important right now. It's an honor. Thank you so much. We'll be there ASAP. Those weren't empty words, since he could feel the Kai Pauls rushing over to the inner city. Moreover, they were coming over extremely quickly, as the chaos in the city had destroyed all the traps. Damn you, heaven-defying general? Let me go. Relax, since I'm not the one who'll kill you. Kook, Keuk. While Arama was struggling against Dana, Li Shin Woo used his energy to pressure the golems, killing the level 6 golems, as they weren't worth the Kai Paul's time, and preventing the rest from moving. The remaining level 7-4 heavenly commanders were unable to resist, and merely staggered and screamed. It was truly an overwhelming pressure. But even Li Shin Woo was restless. To think he'd have to play around with these idiots when the cannon could blow at any minute. If he hadn't managed to evolve Dana as smoothly as he did, then he'd be the one in trouble. Lord Paul Zero, how the hell did you guys get here so fast? At that moment, the Kai Pauls had returned to the battle with impeccable timing. They were so happy to be facing off against the golems that their eyes gleamed. They were right about to rush into the battle, but Li Shin Woo stopped them. Before you go, I have a present for you. A present? Does that mean? Kai Paul asked, representing the rest of them. Li Shin Woo smiled benevolently and took out an item he'd taken out once before. Seeing that, Kai Paul, as well as Arema, who was fighting against Dana, widened their eyes. Why, you bastard? This is Arema's real body. You'll be able to do your best after eating this, right? Lord Paul Zero, thank you so much, you bastard, Paul Zero. As if he were a mother giving her son a lunchbox filled with a nutritious and light meal before their college exam. Li Shin Woo passed Kai Paul Arema's real body. Kai Paul was deeply touched and his throat was choked up, yet he barely managed to respond. Whereas, Arema Steelworker was filled with rage and hatred. You demon? Affirmative, Jin said quietly. Although Kracia was busy maintaining the status magic, she faintly nodded her head and agreed with her. Hua, you. When Kai Paul absorbed Arema Steelworker's body, the change was incredibly dramatic. He screamed, as though he were a Saiyan witnessing his friend's death and turning Super Saiyan, and resulted in a dramatically changed Kai Paul. Kugao, Kihit, power. This power is for taking my revenge. Ah, it's delicious, so delicious. The bodies of those traitors. They taste sweet, so sweet. Beside him, the other Kai Pauls had absorbed the remaining 4 heavenly commanders' original bodies, or the other golems' night bodies. Each and every one of the Kai Pauls were transforming into a frightening and strange new appearance. They'd hidden the fact that they were chimeras so well until now, but they suddenly had transformed into such a fearsome state, as if they were cats gnawing at and spitting out a grasshopper. It's not over yet. We need more to complete our evolution. Right, what you need is over there. Their master, Li Shin Woo, knew exactly what they needed to complete their evolution. They required Arema Steelworker, who had forgotten all about his battle with Dana and rushed over, along with the rest of the 4 heavenly commanders, and the golems. How dare you? How dare you give my body to those lowly beasts? I can't forgive you. I can't permit this. I'll rip you to pieces. Yeah. Just eating their bodies wouldn't complete their revenge. Only by eating their golem bodies, which held their very souls, could they take one step further as avengers. Lord Paul Zero, at this very moment, we are so glad that we pledged our loyalty to you. We will prove our loyalty to you now. Kuu, revenge. It's time for our long-awaited revenge. Unleash your rage onto the arrogant and narrow-minded surface dwellers. We'll crush you, exactly like what you did to us. All the chimeras had overcome their limits and were emitting their increased mana. They then faced the golems and rushed towards them. Although Kai Paul should have been a level 7 still, the pressure he emitted was no less than a level 8 za. No, the main Kai Paul wasn't the only one. The other Kai Pauls were the same. Li Shin Woo soon realized that his Kai Pauls were under the effect of his rebellion skill. It was quite advantageous to him. Help them, Dana. With their help, you should be able to take down those golems with ease, as they're tired from battle after battle. It's quite persuasive hearing it from the very man that exhausted the golems to that extent. They're the knights that were sacrificed in the surface dwellers' plan. Of course I'll help. The surface dwellers must pay for their sins. Fortunately, Dana wasn't swayed by their hideous appearance and had immediately figured out the truth. The more he talked with her, the less he could stand Sarah von Ratandane. Li Shin Woo was moved and wiped the resulting tears. He then left the battle to her and turned around. He wanted to watch the chimeras take their revenge, but as he'd said several times, he didn't have the time to do so. Shin Woo, this is really killing me. Don't worry, Arema's attack caused my head to spin, giving me an idea. Are you planning on changes its vector? Yeah, it seemed like Kracia had the same idea. Shin Woo nodded his head and placed his hand onto the cannon once more. It felt as though the massive accumulated energy would blow at any time, and the ice element mana holding it would melt away. As he thought, stopping it now would be impossible. But changing its direction might be possible. Since it's a cannon. I was thinking about that too. Kracia hadn't only been focusing on keeping the massive energy in check. She had been trying to push the energy into a different direction, in order to reduce the damage it inflicted. However, doing so wasn't so simple. It was difficult enough that Dana, who had been controlling the cannon before, had failed, so how hard must it have been for her? But Shin Woo hadn't suggested it without having anything in mind. Ta-da, so here's where this guy comes in. It was the bone bracelet that he'd equipped to his wrist. It was the artifact that the Archmage had left behind, the proof of death. It would also serve as proof that Shin Woo could beat the Archmage, as it had absorbed a portion of the Archmage's soul, but aside from that, the artifact itself was quite impressive. Proof of death, +4. LV8. Durability. 1. 327 2500ths. Element. Darkness LV8. Options. Magic +500. The creator can assume absolute control over similar artifacts and the effectiveness of every artifact in their control is increased. Special active skill. Rush of Death. This artifact messes with the energy of any artifact that it resonates with. It will cause a huge explosion that deals 3 times the corresponding artifact's maximum mana. This is completely, yep, it's what allowed him to control Dana. I'm telling you, that lich is really thorough. If you had something like this, then use it earlier. Kracia was pissed and kept hitting Shin Woo's chest. She wasn't being charming, she was really trying to hurt him, but her anger made sense, considering how much she'd been doing up to now. But Shin Woo felt like it was unfair. Right after he beat the lich, Sarah's heart had been pierced by her older brother. He'd managed to save her life by turning her into a banshee, but then he had to fight against Sigald. And now, the cannon was about to blow. He'd revived the princess to help deal with it, but then Arama had decided to attack him one last time. Shin Woo didn't even have any time to look over his loot. At first, I thought this bracelet just supplemented one's mana or life force, since the lich was able to last so long against me. But the Archmage had just been efficiently draining energy from the cannon with the bracelet. By equipping this bracelet, the Archmage could exhibit unrivaled power with artifacts that he'd created. Here's where it gets important. Yeah, this is where it starts. Shin Woo and Kracia agreed to a temporary ceasefire. Once they exchanged eye contact, Kracia ceased her stasis magic. Shin Woo immediately imbued a generous amount of his darkness mana into the proof of death, and turned the cannon around. The bracelet's special active skill is most likely to blame for the energy going out of control. I may not be able to cancel a skill that's been activated already, but I should be able to adjust the result of that skill. Although he couldn't stop the cannon from firing, he could turn the cannon in the direction he wanted. Was it because he'd reached peak mastery in the darkness element? If not, was it because of his innate ability to distort cause and effect as a joker? He'd done it so easily that his struggles thus far felt funny. The cannon screeched as he adjusted the height of the cannon, as well as its direction. All right, if I turn it this way, it'll face the capital, right? But Shin Woo, there's a fundamental problem with that. You're talking about the undead curse, right? They may not become as strong as the forces in the palace, but they'll become at least 1.5x as strong. No matter where he shot this, the energy would result in a catastrophe. If he shot it straight, then he might be able to pierce right through the barrier and deliver the undead curse to the surface. It had that much power. It's so powerful that it may create a dungeon. You can't just shoot it as is. Though it's much better than us dying. This is where it all starts. Kracia, watch. You may be able to wield this power in the near future. That's that unknown power that you used to change the spirit general. That's right. Shin Woo began to use his innate element, Dark Shadow. It might be impossible. He might fail, like how he failed to save Sarah's life as a human. But he might succeed too. On his second try he managed to turn Dana into a new species, didn't he? So, he would never know without trying. Moreover, I have this bracelet, the artifact's controller. What would the lich think when he realized that he'd lost the proof of death? He may think that another person wouldn't be able to use the artifact that he'd created as they pleased. since he had so much pride, as he had created the item and was able to wield it so well. However, Shin Woo was the master of darkness. If the artifact was created by the darkness element, then Shin Woo would be able to wield it better than any other. At least, he should. Even if that weren't true, he would make it so. He would fool them, the world, mana, the artifact itself, and the canon. He'd fool them all. The beginner dark shadow element has become LV10 and evolved into the intermediate level. You can cause more fundamental reversals of cause and effect. Magic has increased by 100. Was it a coincidence? At that moment, the dark shadow element evolved into the intermediate level. It had only reached level 9 just a short while ago, when he'd turned Dana into an immortal. If it had reached the intermediate level earlier, then he might have been able to save Sarah. However, it was precisely because she'd turned into a banshee that the dark shadow element had leveled up this much. In any case, the new dark shadow gave him a ton of confidence. At the same time, he realized how to more efficiently use the dark shadow element. I'm going to start by making small changes in cause and effect, until it causes a huge domino effect and everything breaks down. Although this bracelet was originally the Archmage's, it had become Shin Woo's item now. That would be the start. He would channel his dark shadow through the artifact and control this ridiculously huge cannon. No, he would take ownership of it. It didn't work before, but now I should be able to. Shin Woo placed his bracelet-equipped hand onto the gun barrel and concentrated. He would fool the world, the cannon, and reverse cause and effect. Darkness formed, as if were being squeezed out of his fingertips. The area he touched was only the beginning. The darkness spread throughout the gun barrel, as if they were branches of a tree, and immediately covered it. Thus, it wouldn't matter how rowdy the massive energy within was. His authority had made the cannon his. Through the bone reinforcement skill, the LV9 heaven-rending cannon has changed. It had begun to change. The cannon itself was made of an unknown metal, and it became distorted, beginning to emit a bizarre sound. Its shape became more mysterious and frightening than before. Though it was duller than before, it was more dark and damp, as well as more deadly than before. It was also smaller, but it looked longer. It felt like it had changed from a cannon to a sniper rifle. You have acquired the LV9 Heaven-Defying Flagbearer, +5. The form and the energy it contains is unstable, so there is a chance it could get damaged. One of the giant sources of darkness that existed in the Empire had fallen into Shin Woo's hands. The undead curse struggled within, as if would blow any minute now, but it was beginning to change due to the effects of dark shadow. The speed of conversion was incredibly fast. This is unbelievable. What happens when you reverse a curse? It becomes a blessing. What happens when you reverse death? It becomes life. The energy that had been waiting to blow had finally been converted into firing. Eat this, you damn Lich Emperor. It's the blessing of life that you wanted so badly. It fired a blinding beam of light mana straight at the capital. Everyone shut their eyes tightly at the blinding light. The undead curse, which had built and built over dozens of years, had been converted into the highest level of light by dark shadow. A light so powerful that it couldn't be classified as either intermediate or high rank. Kook, Geok, it didn't matter how much you trained your body if you were to face it. Only Shin Woo, who had reached peak darkness mastery, could deal with it somewhat. Fortunately, it didn't target his party. With the help of the proof of death, he'd changed the cannon's trajectory. It possessed enough light to topple a country, and that very light went towards the capital in a gentle curve. He'd converted all of the accumulated energy into light, and he would return it to its creator. It was a plausible ending. The heaven-defying flagbearer, +5, has been destroyed. Your bone reinforcement is not at a high enough level yet to absorb it. Repairing it is possible. Of course it'd be destroyed. While he vacantly watched the arc of light, he heard the sound of the 100-meter-tall bone cannon begin to break apart and simultaneously received that message. Shin Woo had expected this to happen and merely smiled bitterly. He hadn't let out a tester or anything, he'd discharged all of cannon's accumulated energy at once. It would be stranger if it hadn't broken after releasing all that energy. Once the cannon was finished releasing all its energy, it broke into pieces and fell to the ground. Shin Woo picked up the pieces of the heaven-defying flagbearer and placed them into his inventory. When he'd reached level 8, His inventory had expanded, so he was able to store all of the pieces. Shin Woo, you always go above and beyond my imagination when solving problems. It's thrilling, though I don't miss it. You don't need to miss it. Kracia, who had just watched from start to finish, came over to him with a vacant expression and said. Li Shin Woo pushed her aside, as she looked kind of out of it. While doing so, Kracia spoke unexpectedly. I think I gleaned something from that. There's something beyond what I was seeking. Oh, really? It was an element. If an element is brought to its maximum potential, it then evolves into more of a concept than an amalgamation of mana, right? Right. You really pieced that together from just watching that beam? Thanks, Shin Woo. You gave me some hints and a clear view of it right in front of me. As expected, geniuses were different. Li Shin Woo had barely come to that realization after acquiring an innate element, yet Kracia, who was a human without bone reinforcement, was able to figure something out from watching his dark shadow firsthand. He was astonished by her findings. Given time and a budget, I should be able to do it too. There's plenty of time in the future. I'm not talking about the time I have left. Because the shot was so powerful, the light remained in the air, as if it were a mirage. Kracia pointed to the mirage, no, the capital it was aimed at, and said. Your battle's already begun. We don't have much time left here. So that's what you were talking about. He couldn't help but nod. If the Emperor just sat back and did nothing after getting attacked by that barrage of light, then he wouldn't be an emperor, he'd be an idiot. The final battle was approaching. Even though Kracia was a genius, she wouldn't be able to obtain an innate element in that short period of time. There was an absolute limit to one's level. If only you could use bone reinforcement on me too. I'll use it on you later if I can. For now, let's clean up and talk about how we're going to take down that pissed off emperor. In any case, they'd taken care of the foremost problem, so Li Shin Woo had planned on taking care of Arama Steelworker himself. But he was shocked when he turned around. Even Wild Card couldn't predict this situation. K Kiahyok, K Kuha, Kai Paul's sharp nails were penetrating through Arama's face and stomach. Li Shin Woo could tell that its nails were piercing through Arama's core. He wasn't the only one. The other Kai Pauls were inflicting severe wounds to the other golems as well. Dana was helping them, sure, but how did they manage this in such a short period of time? Li Shin Woo briefly felt it to be strange, but he understood when he saw the Kai Pauls crying bloody tears. Kahok, my eyes hurt. It'll get better. Lord Paul Zero is watching us. So, concentrate on your revenge. The light that had just recently flooded the city. Dana, as well as Arama Steelworker and his golems, were unable to endure the light. However, the Kai Pauls were able to endure purely through their desire for revenge and used this opportunity to strike. An ability, which borders on an authority, that allows them to ignore everything else in the pursuit of their revenge. It's like the Joker karma. There was meaning behind their class after all. Li Shin Woo felt like he'd understood just how frightening the Avenger class was. He remembered how badly they wanted to take revenge on Arama and thought, perhaps this was the most desirable outcome, while also thinking of fatalism, something that didn't suit him at all. It's not over yet. We can't let you go so easily. This would be the start of their true revenge. The Kai Pauls used their flames to melt the golems bit by bit, cut them apart, and eat them. They ate the clumps of iron with such voracity that they would soon finish their entire bodies. What are you doing? Stop, Kook, Kuha, Arama Steelworker cried out. Although his core had been pierced, he endured, perhaps because his core contained his human soul. But in the face of these level 8 enemies, there was nothing he could do. He merely screamed and was forced to just spectate as his golem body was devoured. They won't get heavy metal poisoning? That's really not a problem at this point, you think? Li Shin Woo tilted his head and muttered. Jin then sighed and retorted. Kracia tried her best to look away, while Dana said, my eyes, unexpectedly letting out a cute voice while turning round and round in the air. Hio, and Prince awoke at the best time. Did she even know how many times she'd avoided death while she lay unconscious? She looked around, and soon pointed at Li Shin Woo and yelled. My junior, give me back my junior. You really are a pain? You think it's time? It'll probably be okay. Probably. What the hell are you talking about? Prince gritted her teeth and yelled, seeing how familiarly the heaven-defying general and Kratia were conversing. Shin Woo took off his helmet and instantaneously changed his undead face into his human one. Prince shut her mouth. Huh? Well, this is how it is, senior. I'll explain it soon, so please be patient. Huh? Prince couldn't understand what was going on and tilted her head. Kratia thought she might struggle like Sarah did, so she grabbed onto her. Fortunately, she didn't struggle. She was shocked, unable to accept what was going on, and after trying to process everything, she lost consciousness and fell to the floor once more. Kratia, did you hit her too hard? I admit, I was trying to hurt her. But I think she fainted for a different reason this time. You admit it, with her personality, it makes sense. She's definitely the type you don't want as your friend. Jin, how dare you talk behind her back while she's unconscious? Since she knows you're undead now, introduce me properly when she wakes up. The heroes conversed warmly, washing away a tiny bit of their exhaustion. Then, Kai Paul screamed in joy at fulfilling its revenge. Cool, I guess I got to go. Are you going to do to them what you did to me? It won't be as extreme as what I did to you. Then, I'll get going. The blinding light had subsided somewhat, so Dana approached him and asked. Shin Woo just grinned and replied, and then went towards the Kai Pauls, who had completely devoured all of the golems without leaving a single speck of them. They looked quite menacing, such that they couldn't show themselves to outsiders, but once they saw Shin Woo, they politely prostrated themselves and didn't forget to show their respect. Thank you so much. I will devote my entire being to you, Lord Paul Zero, for giving me a new life and an opportunity to fulfill my revenge. If you still have a use for us hideous, leftover monsters, then please use us whenever you see fit. How could you call yourselves monsters? You guys are family to me. Shin Woo acted and Jin retched from behind him, but like always, he ignored her. He raised both his hands and covered the Kai Pauls with his darkness, which contained the power of Wild Card. He wasn't creating an immortal or anything, he was just trying to make them grow into a different, more favorable direction. Your revenge has been fulfilled. You've already indulged in it, so now digest it and make it your own. Then, not me, but all of you need to decide where you go next. Our revenge isn't finished yet. We cannot rest until the Undead Emperor, as well as the Magic Emperor, who sent Arama down here, are killed. Please command us until then. Alright, then, follow me. Yes, sir. The darkness completely covered the chimeras, and their bodies, which had become monstrous, melted away within the darkness. Shin Woo spoke as if it were incredibly easy, but it actually wasn't so. In the process of obtaining their revenge, the chimeras' forms had become twisted, and Shin Woo was trying to change their appearance to match their karma. He was doing something ridiculous again. This'll hurt. Bear with it. This doesn't even tickle. They had eaten both human and metallic bodies, and were unable to properly digest them, so Shin Woo just extracted their souls. He then infused his mana into their bodies, which were a complete mess from mixing everything together, and transformed them into their most natural shape. After that, he returned their souls to their bodies and then tweaked them to suit them. Because he'd acquired so much knowledge pertaining to golems, and had managed to create a few species, it wasn't very difficult for him. If God were to hear about this, she'd be shocked. Alright, I'm finished. That was simple. Ultimately, their bodies looked no different from a human's. But they were golems on the inside, so they were definitely not human. Perhaps he'd succeeded in creating the perfect android that everyone dreamed of. Though there was one part of them that wasn't robotic. Their soul. LV8 Android 0 Avenger Kai Paul. You have combined the info of countless golems and managed to create an android, a being which cannot be distinguished from a regular human. All stats have increased by 20. In the end, it turned out exactly as he'd expected. While the other Chimera Avenger remained at level 7, or leveled up from level 6, Kai Paul, who'd devoured Arama Steelworker, had reached level 8. Kai Paul, which had originally been made up of several souls and bodies, had finally become a singular being. Its consciousness, which felt as though it were obscured by a thick mist, had cleared up completely without a single cloud in sight. It felt as though it had woken up from a dream and had returned to reality. Kai Paul just vacantly stared at its creator. The naked handsome man was instantly garbed in armor that resembled Shin Woo's. But contrary to Shin Woo's armor, Kai Paul's armor was a dazzling mix of red and gold. Perhaps it was a symbol of its strength. Father, huh? Father, huh? Kai Paul called him father and kneeled before him, and the other Kai Pauls followed suit. Shin Woo had suddenly become the father of all these grown men, so he was startled and took a step back. However, the Kai Pauls were relentless. Thank you, father, father, I'm your son, father. How the hell did it turn out like this? These disgusting guys looked at him with such bright eyes, so Shin Woo wondered whether he should forbid them from calling him father for the time being or not. But he ultimately decided against it. He was weak to his allies. Yeah, I'm your father. On that day, he'd gained so much and lost something trivial. The undead curse, as well as the fate of the underground empire, had taken one step forward towards their mutual end.